Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. Robb Stark. Robb resisted the urge to smack the man across from him. The High Sparrow had once again approached Robb and asked, demanded that he convert to the faith of the Seven, and be recognized by the true gods of Westeros. This had been an ongoing debate between the Norther and the priest ever since Robb had taken the throne. It was like the man was trying to pry a confession from Robb. He came once a month, surrounded by his religious thugs called Sparrows, and asked for an audience with the king. He would then spend hours trying to persuade Robb. It was very taxing. "Please, your grace. Surely after all my visits, you have seen that trees, stones, and rivers are nothing but nature, not gods," the High Sparrow said, speaking to Robb like a maester lecturing a youngling. "The Seven are the true gods of Westeros. Always have been." Tyrion sighed. Robb had dragged his hand to the meeting. He was better at dealing with the foolish fanatics than Robb was. "High Septon," Tyrion sighed tiredly. "If the Seven are the true gods, as you have said many times, then why were they not worshipped until after the Andals invaded?" Robb gazed at the older man. He was not like any Septon that Robb had met, nor was what the leader of a large, organized faith should look like. He wore a simple white robe that reached just above his ankles. He didn't wear shoes, but his feet looked as tanned and as tough as leather. He did not adorn himself with jewels or colorful clothes. He was a simple man who had a will of iron and expected nothing but utter obedience to the faith of the Seven from all. After their first meeting with the man, Tyrion had warned Robb to keep an eye on him, warning that, if left unchecked, he would raise the faith militant. That was something that Robb refused to allow.
The High Sparrow glared at Tyrion.
"Westeros was filled with barbarians and savages when the Andals arrived," he answered firmly. "Just because they had no knowledge of the Seven does not mean that they were not here." "Careful," Robb grumbled. "My family came from those barbarians." "As did mine," Tyrion added. "Look, High Septon, is His Grace's faith so important to you? He has married a good woman and has a child with her. He has protected and fed his people. He has been wise and just in his rulings. Everything the Seven demands from us, he has been." The old man shook his head. "While His Grace has ruled better than the monster born of incest, Joffrey or the Targaryens, he still worships trees. That is unacceptable, as is the fact that he has allowed another pagan religion to stay in Westeros." Robb raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" "The Red Priests." The High Septon all but snarled. "You have allowed them to preach in Westeros." Months ago, a small group of Red Priests from Asahai had approached Robb asking for land around the city to build a temple. Robb had granted them their request, but had placed strict limitations on them at the same time. They were not to preach outside of their temple, and any violent actions by the small group or their followers would be met with harsh punishments. Truthfully, with the High Septon breathing down his neck and his last experience with a priestess from Asahai, Robb was hesitant to give them land or allow them to build a temple. But Margaery and Tyrion had advised Robb to do so, noting that they could very easily raise support for Daenerys if Robb wasn't welcoming to their kind. "I allow all to practice the faith they are comfortable with, so long as they follow the laws of the land," Robb answered easily. "Do you have a problem with my judgment?" Robb had given the man an out, but like always, he stubbornly refused to take it. "There is only one faith, my lord. It is not a fire demon from across the sea, nor is it a nymph of the forest." The High Septon declared, "If you do not protect our faith, I will do so." The blood in Robb's veins went cold, and his eyes narrowed as one hand was laid lightly on Claw, which leaned against the table. "Careful, High Septon. I am willing to overlook your blatant disrespect of my faith, but I will not accept threats to the peace of my kingdom." The two men glared at each other. The High Septon had a will of iron which gave him the courage to speak as boldly as he does, but Robb had faced down dragons and emerged victorious in the end. If the High Septon wanted to bring the faith militant back from the dead, Robb would snuff it out quicker than a breeze against a candle. Robb was not afraid to fight fire with fire, and he was positive that he would win against any ragtag army the zealot in front of him could raise. "I think this meeting is done," Tyrion said gently. "Thank you, your holiness, for your words, but I believe the king must once again decline your offer." The High Septon glanced at Tyrion before standing up. "Very well," he said simply, before leaving the room, followed closely by his men. When he was gone, Robb exhaled and slammed his hand against the table. "That bloody man," he growled. "I'd rather face dragons again." Tyrion, already cradling a glass of wine in his hands, nodded. He refuses to take no for an answer. I would have loved to see him and my father clash. Or maybe him and the Queen of Thorns. A match for the ages. Robb chuckled darkly. I believe Lady Olenna would meet her match with that one. I wouldn't be surprised if he mentions the true faith too much, and she has one of the twins break the man's neck. My sister would have believed that she could control him. Tyrion mused. Probably would have used the man to humiliate her enemies, before she eventually loses control over the faith and it brings her down as well. Speaking of your family, have Tommen and your brother accepted the offer? Robb asked, pouring himself a glass of wine as well. Tyrion nodded. He does. He is willing to submit himself to whatever rules you will place on him. I'm glad he's coming. You miss him, Robb said. He could understand the feeling. Besides having Jon reside in the Red Keep for a year, all he could do was send letters to his family in the north. He did receive regular letters from Sansa in the Vale. She was very happy in the Eyrie, surrounded by honorable knights and pleasant ladies, while Harold courted her. I do, Tyrion said, but I feared that losing so much would send him over the edge, both physically and mentally. You feared he would kill himself? Robb asked. He remembered seeing the Kingslayer for the first time in Winterfell, which seemed like ages ago. The man had been the embodiment of arrogance and confidence. Thoughts of suicide seemed like the last thing the man would have. He had been the Golden Boy, Your Grace, Tyrion explained. No offense to your father, but the moniker of Kingslayer sullied his white cloak. When his crimes were revealed to the realm, the death of Cersei and our father, and being stripped of his knighthood, I did fear what he might do. That's why I tasked him with training Tommen. It very well could have saved him. Robb nodded. I don't know if your brother can make up for his past, but hopefully, he can do some good with the time he has left. You have a habit of giving people a second chance, Tyrion noted. The Martells, Jaime, Hells, even the Targaryen girl. You keep it up, you'll be known as King Robb the Reluctant to Kill. Robb chuckled. That's why I have you, my brilliant hand. You have that southern ruthlessness that my innocent northern heart doesn't. Tyrion snorted and took a drink. There's a compliment in there somewhere, I'm sure. Samwell Tarly. A knock brought Sam out of his reading. He had sent his diagnosis to the Maester at Harvest Hall, and had received word that the ointment prescribed by Maester Tarvin was indeed working. Now he was finishing up the rest of the glossary of medical knowledge and taking notes on questions that he would send back to the Citadel for answers. Although Sam was a fine Maester in his own right, there was still so much he had left to learn. With many of the books he read, especially regarding healing, he sent pages of notes back to the Citadel, where an Archmaester would read them and send answers back. Come, Sam called, distractedly. The door opened to reveal a servant, with a few more behind him, all bearing stacks of books. The servants came in and set the books down on a nearby table, carefully arranging them so that there was no chance they'd fall. The lead servant handed Sam a scroll. From Long Lake, Grand Maester. Sam looked confused, but took the scroll nonetheless. Thank you. Thurman, the man answered.
Thank you, Thurman, Sam said.
The servants bowed and left, with Thurman closing the door behind him. Sam got up from behind his desk and grabbed a book at the top of the stack, carefully opening it up. It was filled with runes, a language that he couldn't read. Sam closed the book and looked at its spine, but the words there were also runes. Sam set the book down and grabbed the scroll, breaking the seal and unrolling the parchment. It was a letter from Jon. Sam. These books were saved by Maester Luwin before Winterfell was burned to the ground. I don't believe they were in the library, but hidden somewhere else. I'm not sure why, but Luwin rarely did anything without thinking. As you might have already learned, these books are written in the runes of the First Men. The Maester here at Long Lake offered to have them transcribed, but I sent them to you first. I do not know why, but there is something important about these books. Luwin was very protective of the library. There is a reason he kept these in the crypts. Whatever that reason is, you and Robb should know. I have also sent the son of Torgon Flint, Artos Flint, to help. The mountain clans of the north still speak in the tongue of the First Men, and Artos is able to read many of the runes. He will have arrived with the books. Call upon him as you need. I should also mention that it was my maester, Irwin, who found these books hidden in the back of the Great Hall before the castle was built. Luwin had hidden the books there in a chest. So if any great discovery is made, then I hope you will include Maester Erwin as the one who originally found these books.
Your friend.
Tuan. Sam put down the letter and walked back over to the books, running a hand over them. He was very intrigued and wanted to start working on the books immediately. The idea that they may possess hidden or important information was something that tugged at Sam's scholarly heart. Sam poked his head out of his door, catching the nearest servant. I need Ardos Flint. He should have just arrived. The servant nodded and walked off at the same relentlessly fast pace that all servants walked with. Sam returned to his desk and immediately began clearing it of anything he didn't need. Archimeister Tavern's book and all the other volumes Sam had lined up to read later were all moved to another table. He then checked to make sure he had enough parchment and ink, knowing that transcribing anything took a lot of both. He couldn't help but feel excited. In the way some men look forward to a fight or a good meal, Sam always looked forward to learning. His world, especially early on, had been hell. Books had, and he would be the first to admit that food, too, had been his escape from it all. As an afterthought, Sam began to rummage through the library, pulling out any book that was related in any way to the First Men. When he came back over to his desk, he found a young man waiting just inside the door. He was stout, with long, greasy hair and slight stubble forming around his square jaw. He was dressed in a leather vest that was only tied up halfway, exposing his muscular chest, and woolen breeches tucked into leather boots. You must be Artos, Sam said, placing the books down and nodding to the young man. Artos nodded back. You're Master Samwell. Just Sam, please, Sam replied. John said you can read the runes of the First Men. Artos shrugged. Some. Sam grabbed the first book and opened it as he took a seat behind his desk, motioning for Artos to do the same. When the young man was seated, Sam passed the book to him. Can you tell me what these runes mean? Artos took a moment to look them over before nodding. I can. Sam picked up a quill and dipped it into the inkwell. Go on, Jaime Lannister. Jaime leaned against the wall, watching as the Master-at-Arms worked with Tommen. The man wasn't as good as Jaime, but as Tommen's teacher, Jaime wanted the boy to become exposed to all kinds of forms and techniques. Jaime's style was tailored to fit his natural speed and agility, but he had also picked up tips and tricks from his time as a squire for the late Lord Sumner Craighall and the fortnight he spent at Riverrun in his youth, where he practically followed the Blackfish everywhere. Saddington, a guard said quietly, walking up to Tim. Just Jaime. Jaime responded instantly before looking at the man. What is it? Lord Edmure has requested your presence. Jaime sighed and pushed off the wall, following the guard into the castle. He had been expecting sooner or later to be summoned by the Lord of Reverun. He expected that he would be summoned quite a bit by the Lord of whatever castle Jaime and his group stopped at. The two made their way through the castle with Jaime receiving his fair share of sideways glances. He figured that they would now be a regular part of his life, and that he could either ignore them or allow them to get to him. After being called the Kingslayer for so long, glances were nothing. Lord Edmure is just inside, the man said, cracking the door open. Jaime opened the door fully. Inside, the Lord of Riverrun was speaking with a maester and an official-looking man, clearly a steward of some kind. Eddard himself didn't look much different from the last time Jaime and he had seen each other, which had been the courtyard of the Red Keep when Jaime had been in chains, escorted by men of Riverrun to face the king's justice for his part in the war. Riemann Utharitz, give us a moment, Edmure ordered. The two men both bowed and left, closing the door behind them. Edmure gestured for Jaime to take a seat across from him. A long sword was leaning against the desk, very close to Edmure's right hand, while Jaime himself had only a hunting knife at his side. A woefully inadequate weapon against castle-forged steel in the hands of someone who knew how to use it. Your man said you asked for me, Jaime said, readying himself for whatever abuse was about to be unleashed on him. Edmure simply regarded him. His blue eyes gazed into Jaime's emerald ones. The man had changed since he had been Jaime's prisoner, so long ago at the onset of the War of the Five Kings. He had been overconfident and seemed slightly stupid, both attributes that had allowed Jaime to capture him in the first place. Now, he seemed much more naturally confident and sure of himself. Lordly, if such a word could be used without being obvious. He was analyzing Jaime, almost in the same way Robb Stark had during their meeting after the Battle of King's Landing. You think I called you here to curse you out or threaten you? Edmure said finally. I have every right to, but that's not why I asked you here. Jaime raised an eyebrow. All right. Why did you ask me here? Edmure sighed. I asked you here to thank you. Usse was a little taken back. Why? My father was with Ned Stark when they reached King's Landing at the end of Robert's rebellion, Edmure explained. He and my uncle would have died if not for you. Jaime shook his head. Don't thank me. That little act of chivalry didn't exactly help me in any way. Because you didn't tell anyone about it, Edmure grunted. You let people assume that you killed the Mad King because of your father. You never explained to Robert or even your father why. Jaime nodded slowly. Fair. Thankfully, the wildfire has been disposed of. So, I've heard, Edmure said. Your brother and Prince Oberyn are said to have played a large role in ridding the city of the substance. There have even been restrictions placed on the Pyromancers Guild written by Lord Tyrion. Jaime remembered the letters from Tyrion detailing just how close the city had been to utter destruction. With the combined intellect of Prince Oberyn and Tyrion, along with Ser Davos Seaworth's knowledge of the city, it took 2 months to safely collect and diffuse the wildfire. How they managed that Jaime had no idea, but he could feel the relief in his brother's letters after they had managed to get rid of the damn stuff. Heir had the numbers burned into his mind. 250 barrels under the Red Keep, 50 barrels under each gate, 20 barrels had been placed under each main street throughout the city. 200 under the Dragon Pit and the Great Septon. Every room that held a barrel had been placed at bedrock, meaning that the explosion could only go up, or so Tyrion had explained to him. Prince Oberyn estimated the explosion to be heard for leagues around, and seen as far south as Sunspear. All that would have been left of King's Landing would have been a giant, smoking crater that would have made Summerhall look like a candle. Tyrion has a tolerance for stupidity, Jaime said quietly. Brewing a lake of wildfire for a man called the Mad King exceeds that tolerance. Edmure grunted. Wasn't one of the men you killed the guildmaster? Jaime nodded. Rosart. He and 2 others had been the ones who worked with Aerys on the plot. What happened to the other 2? They were found dead in the days after the city was taken, Jaime responded. I had already killed one. I thought I might as well complete the set. Edmure chuckled grimly, pouring himself a glass of wine. He glanced at Jaime, the question obvious, but the ex-knight shook his head. So what are you now? Edmure asked. Lord Jaime Lannister? You're not a knight anymore. I'm just Jaime Lannister, Jaime answered. I'm not lord of anything, and don't ever plan to be. My only goal is to train Lord Tommen in the way of the sword. Does he have potential? Edmure asked, thankfully avoiding asking if he had his father's talent. Jaime shrugged. He's not bad. I'm relying on the lessons taught to me by Sarah Barristan and the Blackfish. Will he train under my uncle at King's Landing? Jaime nodded. He will. I also hope to have a few of the Kingsguard instruct him as well. There is no true way to swing a sword. By exposing him to many masters, I hope that he develops techniques used by all. Edmure raised an eyebrow. Smart. I'll keep that in mind when Hoston is older. The 2 men fell into an awkward silence. It lasted for a few moments before Jaime couldn't stand it. He got out of his seat, bowing slightly to Edmure. Thank you for your hospitality, my lord, Jaime said. I should see that Tommen makes it to his lessons. Of course, Edmure answered easily. Jaime strode out of the room without another word. If every meeting goes like that, then Jaime thought that perhaps he could make it to King's Landing and back to Casterly Rock before getting a sword stabbed in his chest. Daenerys Targaryen, Pylos, who was usually reserved and solemn, looked amazed and excited when he emerged from the cave. He had a few pieces of parchment in one hand and a case of charcoal sticks in the other. Daenerys, Ser Jorah, and Ser Barristan had been waiting patiently for close to an hour, as the young maester examined the cave. My lady, you best come and see this, Pylos said. Daenerys nodded and followed the maester. Inside, Grey Worm and a few of his men bore torches, further illuminating the inside of the cave. The walls had been carved from living rock, the pick marks from where the cave had been widened being the evidence. The top of the cave was still shrouded in shadow, and, as Ser Barristan had noted earlier, the floor of the cave was sand. The cave looked to have been naturally formed, once upon a time, but it was obvious that it had been altered by man. But what caught her eye was the painting, which Pylos was standing under. It was a rough sketch of a battle scene, On one side were tall, humanoid creatures, drawn with blue and white paint, and they seemed to be fighting a mixed group of tall and short beings that had been made with black paint. The other difference between the two groups was that the figures in black held what looked to be weapons like spears and bows. I believe that this is a painting from the time of the Long Night, Pylos explained. This group here, on the right, is a mixture of humans and children of the forest. The weapons they appear to be holding are presumably the weapons of dragonglass that the children gave to mankind, so that they could defeat the others. This group here, on the left, are the others. Why is this painting on the island? Daenerys asked, holding up the broken shard of dragonglass. Why is dragonglass on the island? Obsidian, my lady, can only be formed at places like this, Pylos explained, still surprising Daenerys with the excitement in his tone. It's forged by the fires of the earth. I wouldn't be surprised if there were small caves up on the volcano that is filled with the stuff. The Maester turned back to the painting. As for this, tales of the time say that mankind went to the children of the forest for help against the others. The children taught man how to kill the others with dragonglass. This is probably where it was mined. Surely a painting like this will have already been discovered. Serra Barristan said. Rhaegar Targaryen spent years on the island. Lady Daenerys and I have walked around the island for days. I've never noticed this cave, nor have I ever heard of it. Pylos shook his head. I sketched the painting and will have it sent to the Citadel to see if there have been other paintings found. I will also search the library, like you. If anyone else has ever found this, then the Maester at the time certainly would have noted it down. Daenerys looked at the painting, particularly at the group of blue beings. She felt a chill blow down her spine and settle in her stomach. It was a feeling that she hadn't felt in a long time, not since her marriage to Khal Drogo. Fear. Very well, Daenerys said. Could you also make a second sketch of this painting? Pylos nodded. Of course, my lady. Good. You have 3 days to go through the library and find all you can before I sail for King's Landing. Daenerys said. Will that be enough time? The young Maester nodded again. It should be, my lady. Daenerys turned to Grey Worm. Make sure that Captain Brevin and the Stormborn are ready to sail in 3 days. The Unsullied commander nodded and left without a word. As always, Daenerys appreciated the unquestioning loyalty to her Unsullied. They were her staunchest allies, and had held against the men of the North and the Riverlands during the battle. She could always rely on them. My lady, if I may have a word. Serra Barristan asked carefully. Daenerys nodded and strode out of the cave, her 2 knights following her. When they were on the beach, she caught sight of the look on the old knight's face, and knew at once that he didn't agree with her plan. Do you think it is wise to sail to the city? Serra Barristan asked bluntly. Daenerys raised an eyebrow. This could be important, and Robb, King Robb, should know about it. Do you need to be the one who brings it to his attention? Serra Barristan questioned. Why not a raven? I was the one who made the discovery, Daenerys countered. I should be the one who tells him. Serra Barristan glanced at Serra Jorah, who had been a silent witness to the debate. With both Daenerys and Serra Barristan looking at him, Serra Jorah crossed his arms across his broad chest. I agree with the Khaleesi on this, he answered. Robb Stark isn't Robert Baratheon or Joffrey Waters. He will not dismiss this as a picture. Why is that? Daenerys asked, now a little curious. She had wanted to travel to the city to see how it was doing under the guidance of Robb Stark and his queen. It had been purely personal, but now Ser Jorah was making another point that was far away from Daenerys' thoughts. Robb Stark is a northerner through and through. Ser Jorah explained. While the southern houses mock the Night's Watch, the Starks of Winterfell have always been a staunch supporter of theirs. The Night's Watch protects the land from wildlings. Serra Barristan argued, looking flustered for the first time since Daenerys had brought him into her service. Not mythical creatures. Ser Jorah shook his head. There is something about that picture. I felt the northern air on my bones and the fear in my gut. I do not think it was a coincidence that the Quollii found this cave. Serra Barristan sighed and shook his head. What if the king laughs in our faces and dismisses it as nothing? Then we remind him that dragons were once dead and gone, Ser Jorah answered firmly. There is something strange happening in Westeros, and it started the moment those dragons emerged from the fire with the Khaleesi. How do you know this? Daenerys asked. Serra Jorah grimaced. Winter is coming. Khaleesi, those have been the words of House Stark since the Age of Heroes. They are not threatening, like ours is the fury, or blood and fire. They warn of a threat that, in the past centuries, has fallen to legend and myth, but now those legends might be coming back to haunt us. I have seen the signs, or at least shadows of them, and I have spoken to the traders from White Harbor. The North is preparing for a long and grueling winter that is not far off. With that coming and this, he said, gesturing at the cave, I fear what comes with it. Daenerys didn't need to ask any more questions. She could tell just from the Northman's tone that he was being completely authentic with her. He truly believed that the others were truly returning to Westeros. You have never led me astray, nor caused me to doubt your word, Ser Jorah, Daenerys said. We will bring this to the king, and should he laugh at us, she glanced at Ser Barristan. We will remind him that winter is coming, and it may carry a much larger threat than the cold. Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion stood close to the throne as the king held court. So far it had been an uneventful day. Most of the disputes were about property or money. Petty gripes that both the king and his hand knew needed to be dealt with. Tyrion had first-hand experience with a populace who felt abandoned and ignored by their king. Their suffering almost always turns violent. At least that was the message that was sent when the High Septon's arm had been ripped off by the mob. The final petitioner looked to be a hedge knight. He was tall and scrawny, looking half-starved and as ragged as they came. The joke with hedge knights was that they slept under the hedges or Westeros, and this man certainly seemed to fit the image. His hair and beard were long and greasy, looking as if they had been cut with a blunt knife and a poor reflection in a pool, and the man looked as if he hadn't had a proper bath in weeks. He wore a mail shirt that showed rust in some areas and had battered steel plate armor running along his right arm from his shoulder to his wrist. His shield was slung across his back and his helm was held under his arm. However, despite his appearance, he swaggered forward with an overblown sense of arrogance. What truly surprised Tyrion was that the man wasn't acting. He knelt before the king, bowing his head until his chin touched his chest. Your Grace, I have come to pledge my sword to you, he declared, his statement loud and clear for the entire court to hear. The king raised an eyebrow. What have I done to earn such a reward? I am the finest sword in the realm, sire, and I have come to become one of your sworn 7, the man answered firmly, looking up. The crowd of courtiers shifted slightly. Tyrion saw that many were hiding smirks, clearly amused with the man's desire. In the days of Robert or Joffrey, the man would have been laughed right out of the room. But King Robb had made it clear that each person, from the highest lord to the lowest beggar, would be treated with respect, despite whatever petition they brought before him. People of the court respected the rule, but that didn't stop them from showing the amusement they received from the night. Tyrion glanced at Lord Royce, whose youngest son currently served in the elite guard. He did not look amused. The king leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs. Thank you, sir. Sarah Harrison Jass, your grace. Septa Harrison, thank you for your offer, but I must refuse. I have no absences in my king's guard at the moment. Perhaps I can have the captain of my household guard find you a place. The king suggested, gesturing towards Ian Hawker. The man shook his head. That is untrue, my lord. Robb frowned. Are you saying I lied? No, your grace. At least not on purpose. Sir Harrison explained, his mail shirt rattling as he stood up. You have a woman on your guard who does not belong. I am offering to take her place. The 7 warriors had not reacted when the man had said that he wanted to join the king's guard. It was only when he blatantly disrespected their commander, a warrior all in the Red Keep had respect for, did they finally react. All 6 knights reached for their weapons. Septa Loras, the youngest of the group, even took a step forward. Hold, the king ordered, looking at his knights before turning it back on the man. You believe that you can serve me better than Commander Brienne? Sarah Harrison nodded enthusiastically. Of course, women are not fit to fight. They belong in the kitchens and running the household. I do not fault you for placing one in your guard as you are, from the north, and do not fully understand the customs of the south. I only wish to help correct this oversight. The room was now deathly silent. No one was smirking or smiling anymore. The man in the center of the room had not only disrespected the commander of the King's Guard, but had basically called the king an idiot who did not understand the South. Tyrion wasn't sure if the man had a death wish, or if he truly was so stupid. From what he had gathered so far from the man and his brief conversation with the king, he was a fool, plain and simple. Unfortunately, he was a fool who had no idea what response he had just provoked from the king. The king glanced at his wife, who sat on a smaller stone throne just a step down from the Iron Throne. The queen nodded back to her husband, a silent message passing between the two. Seftet Harrison Jas, are you willing to prove that you are capable of joining my Kingsguard? The king asked, practically glaring at the man with undisguised annoyance. When the hedge knight nodded in response, the king clapped his hands decisively. Good. You will duel my commander, he said. You are willing to stand here and disrespect her. Prove to me now that you are a better warrior than her, and you may join my Kingsguard. Sarah Harrison shook his head. I cannot fight a woman, sire. It is against my vows as a knight. The king frowned, obviously trying to think of a way around his vows, but Tyrion quickly stepped forward to help put an end to the man's embarrassment. Sarah Harrison, have you ever fought in a battle? The hedge knight hesitated before nodding quickly. Of course. Tyrion knew that it was a lie, but it still served his purpose. So has Commander Brienne. Knights on the battlefield had no problem fighting her, and since you are the greatest sword in the land, neither should you. All eyes had gone from Tyrion to the hedge knight, who turned red in the face. He glanced between Tyrion, the king, and the commander before nodding choppily, accepting the challenge. He set his helm on his head, pulling the strap tight before setting his shield firmly on his left arm. Finally, he ripped his sword from its sheath. It looked just as battered and rusted as the man's armor. Brienne glanced back at the king, who simply nodded. The warrior woman removed her helm, handing it to the man next to her, before unsheathing her weapon, the Valyrian steel sword Red Rain. Her expression was one of disgust mixed with controlled fury, and Tyrion found it quite terrifying. The two warriors moved forward slowly. Sarah Harrison was crouched slightly, with his shield up and his blade set flat on its top edge. Tyrion was not a fighter himself, but as the brother to one of the best warriors in the realm, he could tell that this man was far from one. Tyrion could pick out at least 5 flaws in his form. No doubt more experienced warriors like the king or Lord Royce would be able to pick out many more. Expert warriors like Commander Brienne could see all of them. Without warning, Brienne lunged forward, her sword sliding under the shield, and was heading right for the man's midsection. Sarah Harrison let out a surprised yelp and managed to bat the Valyrian steel blade away with the rim of his shield, before answering with his own strike, which was battered away by Brienne's vambrace. The fight continued for a few more embarrassing moments. Brienne would attack suddenly and Sarah Harrison would just manage to defend himself, before responding with a weak strike of his own. Brienne would parry or block it with contemptuous ease, before the cycle repeated itself. Occasionally the warrior woman would kick or shove her opponent, sending him crashing to the ground, but he was immediately back on his feet every time. Brienne's sword flashed down at the man, but instead of moving out of the way, Sarah Harrison brought his blade up to block. Perhaps he didn't know what Brienne was wielding, or the idiot didn't recognize just how much bigger and stronger his opponent was, but Brienne's blade sheared through Sarah Harrison's like a knife through parchment. The hedge knight could only stare dumbly at his broken blade before he was thrown back. Brienne had taken advantage of the knight's shock and placed her armored boot in the man's chest, sending him flying before he landed on his back, skittering a few more meters from the power of the kick. When he hit the ground, he lost both his helm and his shield, each rolling away as the man lay still, wheezing as he tried to get air back into his lungs. Brienne placed her sword at the man's neck, her blue eyes flashing like lightning. "Yield, Sarah," she demanded. "You have been defeated." The room had remained silent during the entire fight, and now everyone was straining to hear what the man said. "I yield," Sarah Harrison whispered bitterly. Brian nodded and stepped back, turning her back on the man. Harrison scrambled to his feet, his broken sword flying towards Brian's exposed back. It was the crowd's gasp that alerted the Kingsguard commander. As Brian turned, her blade came up and deflected the attack, while her left hand curled instinctively into a fist, smashed into the man's face. The crunch of his nose being splattered across his face could be heard clearly in every corner of the room. The man cried out as his nose broke, dropping his weapon as he fell to his knees, holding his face. Blood streamed through his fingers as tears collected in his eyes. Brienne just looked at the man with disgust before returning to her post, sheathing her sword and reclaiming her helm. The king nodded to Strategizing, who strode forward with two of his men. The watchmen put firm hands on the man's shoulders, with their commander standing behind the embarrassed knight, waiting for orders. Ser Harrison, you have not only proven that you are far from the greatest fighter in the realm, but you are certainly not fit for my Kingsguard or service, the king declared, his voice like iron. You have shamed yourself here today, and if I were a lower man, I would have taken your head for so blatantly insulting me. The crowd was quiet as the king spoke. Tyrion knew that Robb was more annoyed than angry, so he knew that the man wouldn't lose his head. He had been shamed during his duel with Brienne, and now he would be punished befitting his crime stupidity. I strip you of your knighthood. You have no right to have it, the king continued. Your arms and armor will be confiscated, as well before you are escorted out of the city. Perhaps one day they will go to someone more worthy of them. From this day until your death, you are forbidden from returning from the city. If you are found within 10 miles of the walls, then your life is forfeit. Harrison Jass was openly weeping in the arms of the gold cloaks, his tears mixing the blood running down out of his nose. He looked like a broken man, quite the opposite of when he had strode forward not a few minutes ago. His arrogance hadn't just been pricked by Brienne, but completely torn to shreds in front of the entire court, and there was little chance that the man would ever regain it. I will give you another choice, if you wish to take it, the king said after his wife leaned over and whispered something to him. A ship leaves for East Watch by the sea first thing tomorrow morning. You can go with it and join the Night's Watch. Those are your two choices, banishment or the Watch. If I join the Watch, can I keep my knighthood? Harrison asked weakly. No, Robb answered immediately. You have shown that you are not worthy of it. Now give me your answer. Banishment or the Wall. Everyone waited patiently for the man's answer. After what seemed like an eternity, he looked up at the king. I choose banishment. Robb nodded to Strategizing, who barked a command to his men and had Harrison Jass dragged out of the room. Thankfully, his humiliation wasn't worsened by cheering. Most people just looked unimpressed with the man, not having an ounce of sympathy for him. He had, after all, challenged the commander of the Kingsguard. They weren't known as the finest swords in the realm without reason. Jon Stark. Jon emerged from his chambers, looking out the window into the courtyard. There was a lot of activity in the yard. Jon had heard the horn from the top of the wall, announcing the return of one of Thorne's men, but there were none currently ranging that would warrant such a reaction from the other members of the Watch. In the chambers next to him, Small Jon and Alysanne also came out, looking just as curious as Jon. What the hell's is going on? Small Jon grumbled as the trio went outside, stopping at the railing. Many of the watchmen were huddled around the tunnel that traveled under the wall. Many of the brothers looked visibly shocked, turning to their comrades and speaking in lowered tones. Jon noticed Strategizing marching towards the group. Danos at his side, the knight caught sight of Jon and his friends, motioning for them to follow. All right, you lot. Strategizing shouted, get back. The crowd slowly moved away, allowing the Lord Commander to see what all the commotion was about. Jon, Small Jon, and Alysanne jogged to catch up with Thorne, curious to see what was happening. When the trio finally reached the entrance to the tunnel, Jon stopped dead in his tracks, not believing what he was seeing. It was Uncle Benjen, Bran, Hodor, and a girl he didn't recognize. Strategizing had clasped arms with Uncle Benjen, and another man that Jon had come to know as Coran. Halfhand had forced his way through the crowd to greet his fellow ranger, but soon Benjen looked over, and he and Jon locked eyes. Jon rushed forward, practically sprinting by the time he slammed into his uncle. The two men embracing, Benjen was laughing softly, just like he always did whenever he visited Winterfell in the past, and hugged Jon as a boy. It was a laugh that only belonged to Benjen. Jon had slight tears in his eyes when he pulled back. Benjen kept his arms on Jon's shoulders, a massive grin on his face. You've grown, Benjen said proudly, looking Jon up and down. You've become a man. Uncle Jon said, unable to fully convey what he was feeling. What happened? Where were you? Benjen shook his head, forestalling any more questions. We'll talk about that later. Jon, now greet your brother. His story is a lot stranger than mine. Jon nodded and moved past his uncle, who moved forward to greet Small Jon and Alysanne. Jon knelt next to Bran, a relieved smile on his face, as he looked at his younger brother. Bran had a smile as well, but it wasn't one of happiness or relief, but grim contentment. Jon said, lovingly, ruffling his brother's hair softly, before placing a hand on his shoulder. Thank the gods you're alive. Bran nodded. I am, he stated bluntly. Jon was a little confused with how serious his brother was being. He was expecting to see his smile, his eyes shining like they always did. Bran seemed reserved, almost unemotional, which was odd considering the circumstance. Jon couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something different about his brother, and it was more than just his mood. Some kind of authority that Jon didn't know about. It was the same way their father was able to silence a criminal with a look, yet still different. I'm Mira Reed, the girl said, breaking the awkwardness. Jon nodded to her. I know your father, Howland. He's a good man, and a friend. How is he? He's well, Jon answered. I'm sure he can't wait to see you. Mira shifted slightly. Thank you. Off to the side, Ghost and Summer were nipping at each other playfully, the two littermates happy to see each other again. Behind him, his uncle was still embracing the friends and brothers he had left behind. There are a lot more brothers here than when I left, Benjen noted, speaking with Thorn in the half-hand. What happened? I can explain that, Uncle, Jon answered, getting to his feet. It seems we both have stories to tell. It took about an hour for the recently returned party to wash and eat, before Mira, Benjen, and Bran gathered in Jon's chambers. Small Jon and Alysanne stood by the wall in the back of the room, just as curious as Jon to hear their story. You should speak first, Jon, Benjen said, nursing a tankard of ale in his hands. Our story is a little tougher to explain, and will take longer to tell. Jon nodded. It truly started when Robert Baratheon entered Winterfell and made Father his hand, but that's irrelevant at this point. The story you care about happens after the death of Robert Baratheon. For the next 2 hours, Jon, with the help of Small Jon, explained the War of the Five Kings, starting with Robb's battles in the Riverlands, and his later journey to the Reach, and parts of the Stormlands, Jon's campaign in the north and his father's arrival with the Company of the Rose, Robb's battles against the Lannisters at Harrenhal and Highheart, before ending with the re-emergence of the Targaryens, the attempted assassination on Robb, and the massive battle at King's Landing. Jon had done the best he could to tell what had happened without over-explaining and confusing everything for his uncle, who listened patiently and asked only a few questions. He had been very surprised to hear about the Company of the Rose, but the mention of dragons didn't shock him like Jon thought it would. How's Robb been as a king? Benjen asked, as Jon took a long drink of ale. He's been nothing short of brilliant, but he has a lot of help, Jon answered after he swallowed. All in all, he'll be just fine, in the south. So why are you here? There was word of an army of wildlings north of the wall, Jon explained. I've come to see how bad the situation is. My father sent a raven saying that I need to find a way to talk to them. Benjen raised an eyebrow before nodding. Aye, that's a good idea. It was Jon's turn to look confused. You think that there's a peaceful solution to this too? Benjen looked Jon in the eye. When I explain what Bran and I have been up to, you'll see that there has to be peace between the Watch and the wildlings. The survival of Westeros depends on it. Bloodraven. The man formerly known as Bloodraven sat upright in his chair, still entangled by roots that were as old and as gnarled as he was. His eyes were closed and his mouth was set in a firm, thin line as he strained. The cave where he resided shook and cracked, but none of the sounds seemed to bother the old man. He continued to focus on the task at hand. Flashback. Bloodraven eyes returned to normal as his gaze fell upon Leaf, whose elfish features were drawn with worry. He knew that she disapproved of his plan, but she had lived long enough to know that there was sometimes no other option. The great bastard has always been a realist and a pragmatist, a trait he developed over his lifetime of politics, war, and subterfuge. A trait he had passed on to the leader of the children. You will need to leave soon, Bloodraven wheezed. They are approaching. You will die, Leaf replied. It wasn't a question, but a fact. Bloodraven nodded slowly. I am old, Leaf, and I have lived a very long and hard life. I will rest. It will not be a painless death, Leaf said again. Bloodraven let out a rasping laugh. It was full of mirth and his own dark humor. There's nothing they can do to me that scares me, he explained. As I've said, I'm an old man who's sitting at death's door. I've had one foot in it for the past 3 decades. After all this time, I will never understand humans. Leaf, shaking her head. Bloodraven smiled slightly. When you lived a life as long and as fraught as mine, death is a gift that I am waiting to receive. The cave shook slightly, pebbles falling and clattering on the ground. Bloodraven winced in pain. "A gift I will receive soon," the old man continued. "I will hold them off. Now go." Leaf seemed stuck for a moment before nodding her head. "You have been a great friend, Brynden Rivers. Rest well and do not give our enemy any satisfaction." "The same to you, Leaf," Bloodraven nodded, closing his eyes. "Go, return to your home, in the south. See the sun and live." Flashback. Then, he slumped back into his chair, sweat rolling from the top of his head, down his birthmark, and onto his robe. The cave had stopped shaking, but the sounds had been replaced with a cold wind, and with it came the smell of death. A freezing white mist rolled into the room, and before long, a dozen figures followed. They carried weapons and armor like all men, but that is where the similarities ended. They wore delicate, reflective armor that was as clear and as still as a pond. Their swords were like blades of crystal and faintly glowed blue. Even the dark cave, under their armor, their blue skin was stretched taut over bone and sinewy muscle. They moved like death and made no sound wherever they stepped. The most intriguing thing about the creatures was their eyes. They blazed like blue stars, and made the old man feel as like his bones had been replaced with ice. "You're too late," he wheezed, glaring at the ancient enemy. There was no point in delaying the inevitable. The creatures before him were incapable of feeling anything but the desire to destroy every living thing. Besides, even if there was a chance he could live, the man was old and all of his past friends had long since been eaten by worms in the ground. The old man looked at the leader of his enemy, a creature he knew well. While the being did not have a name, the old man knew him by one, the Night King. The name was a great fit, for the creature was the last of his original kind. Those who had been created by the great darkness that warred with the old gods before the beginning of time. The other reason it feared was because it looked like the spike of a crown grew from around his skull, threatening to tear his skin. "The crippled wolf has made it south. You'll never touch him," the old man spat, as the Night King approached, drawing his sword. The old man's death was quick. The sword pierced his heart, and as it was withdrawn, the old man crumbled to dust, leaving nothing but an old robe, a throne, and some roots that used to hold up the man formerly known as Bloodraven. "Jon Stark." Jon stood at the top of the wall, looking out over the winter lands beyond. They looked no different than the lands behind him, but the sole difference they shared was that the host of thousands of wildlings was north of the wall. Somehow Jon had to make it so that the host made it south of the wall, all while dealing with the men of the Night's Watch and the Northern Lords. Both groups that would certainly be angered when they hear that thousands of savages will be given land in the north. Ned always had that same look when he was faced with a tough decision. Uncle Benjen joked, coming to stand beside Jon. Lyanna and Brandon used to joke that he would turn to stone. "It's not the decision that's tough," Jon answered. "It's going to be convincing the others that this is needed." "You mean letting the wildlings through the wall?" Benjen said. I'm not looking forward to discussing it with Thorne and the others." "Will they agree?" Jon asked. "Probably not," Benjen sighed. "That's why I need to go back out there." Jon frowned. "But you just returned." "I know, but we need proof," Benjen said grimly. "The Northern Lords will follow Ned if he asks them. But for the Southern Lords, we need more. We need Robb here with representatives from all 7 kingdoms, and show him what we found." "The realm is going to war," Jon blanched. "I know," Benjen said. "So soon after another war just finished, but we won't win this battle if we don't have everyone. Don't forget, the first men didn't win this war without the children of the forest. We need dragonglass and every warrior we can get to the wall. Including the wildlings," Jon said, crossing his arms. "Do you think the others will allow the wildlings to settle among the gift?" Benjen shook his head. "Probably not. The Watch has forgotten its purpose, unfortunately. It's up to me to show why we have the wall." "That the wildlings aren't our enemy," Jon said. "I don't like the idea of you riding out alone." Benjen smiled grimly. "I won't be alone. You're talking about that half-white," Jon said. "How do we know that we can trust him? Or it?" When his uncle had described the man, if such a term could be used, who had helped him first reach the cave of the three-eyed crow, then the wall, Jon had been skeptical. All the questions that he had, such as where the man came from and what has he been doing north of the wall, all this time could not be answered by either his uncle or his brother. All any of them could tell him was that he used to be a man of the Night's Watch and that he was an ally. "Cold Hands is still a brother of the Night's Watch," Jon, Benjen said. He's proven time and again that he is our ally. Jon nodded. Fine. When do you ride out? Day after next, Benjen answered. Why? There are mutineers at Craster's Keep, Jon explained. Hopefully I can get Thorne to trust me if I deal with them. Benjen nodded. I can ride with you to Craster's, but that is all. Thank you, Jon said. Dealing with the mutineers will also give me a reason to be north of the wall where I can deal with Raider without Thorne criticizing my every move. He's never let go of what Ned and Robert did to him, or what he believes they did to him. Benjen grunted. What do you mean? Thorne was a Targaryen loyalist during Robert's rebellion, Benjen explained. He chose the watch over the block. Can't say I blame him, but he's blamed Ned and Robert ever since. Why do you think he's such a bitter block of ice? That's why he hated me, Jon asked, annoyed, because he got sent here by my father after he fought for a madman 20 years ago. Benjen chuckled. Believe me, he wasn't the most welcoming to me either, but we need him. He's one of the most respected members of the Watch. It's easy working with men and women who share the same goal as you. This won't be so easy, his uncle finished, making a subtle nod to Jon's part in the War of the Five Kings. Do you have any tips for dealing with the man? Jon asked, pulling his cloak a little tighter around him as the wind picked up. Stand your ground and let anything he says slide off your shoulder, Benjen advised. If you let him make you angry, he's won. Jon nodded, looking out at the lands beyond the wall. A thought occurred to him. You know, whenever Robb calls the realm to fight, if Thorne pisses off the wrong man, he may get thrown off the wall. Benjen chuckled. I assume you're talking about the Greychen. Aye, he'll learn soon enough that he's going to have to get over his hatred eventually, once he knows what we're fighting and what's needed to make sure we win. How do you feel about Slynt? Jon asked curiously. I made a bet with Yarwick that he dies in some stupid manner, Benjen deadpanned. I've seen a lot of people up here who I know. Just be looking at him, that they won't last long. I can guarantee you that he won't make it through the war, or if he reaches it at all. Not unless we find him hiding in some storage room. Jon laughed. He's one of the men accompanying me to Craster's Keep. How unlucky for us, Benjen grunted. At least we'll get to see what he really is when Thorne can't protect him. How unfortunate for us, Jon repeated. Benjen Stark. You can't be serious. Slynt cried. You want to let the savages through the wall. Benjen raised an eyebrow. Yes, he answered simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. What about that was confusing to you? Yarwick, Corran, and Marsh hid their smiles as Slynt floundered like a fish struggling to breathe. Benjen's single question had halted the man's rant before it could even begin. The only person whose expression Benjen couldn't read was Thorne's and Aemon's. Slynt had been the only man to speak since Benjen laid out his entire plan. But they're our enemy, Slynt said weakly. Benjen shrugged. They've been our enemy. But please think with that pea-sized brain of yours. Why build a wall that's 300 miles long and several hundred feet high to keep out wildlings? He asked, before adding, and when you think you have an answer, don't speak. Yarwick couldn't stop himself, and let out a short bark of laughter before quickly smothering it. Slynt glared down the table before finally falling silent, turning his glare on Benjen. The first ranger gazed at Thorne, waiting for the Lord Commander to speak and make his opinion known. You wish to go beyond the wall and find proof of the others, Thorne said. It was not a question. I do, Benjen answered. I know what's out there, and I will have the help I need. But the king and the southern lords need to physically see what we're up against. And the wildlings, Thorne continued. Those who don't have families can be sent to the other castles along the wall. We have the supplies, from what Yarwick has told me, and we can start to send building crews out there as well. Benjen said, I am well aware of feelings they have for the Watch and we have for them, but if we don't let them through, then we leave thousands of people practically defenseless to be added to the hordes of the dead, where they will become that much harder to kill. Snarks and grumpkins, Slynt muttered. As someone who has fought the undead, I can assure you that nothing short of total dismemberment can kill them, Benjen said with a slight edge in his voice, glaring at the former gold cloak. Though if you doubt my word, you're welcome to ride out with me and help me hunt down these creatures. Is that what you want, Slynt? Janis went red with embarrassment before shaking his head quickly. Benjen rolled his eyes and looked back at Thorne. Corran is more than capable of handling my duties as first ranger while I'm away. Jon and his companions will deal with the mutineers at Craster's before meeting with the wildlings. Benjen finished. What if the lad is captured? Marsh asked. Jon knows what's at risk, Benjen answered. He's hoping that the wildlings will take the deal and then we can begin to sort out the finer details. And by we, you mean us, Marsh said. Benjen hesitated before shrugging and nodded. I do. The room was quiet as the others waited for Thorne to make his verdict. Marsh, Yarok, and Corin didn't see a problem with Benjen's request, if it actually proved the existence of the living dead and thus the existence of White Walkers. Solunt thought that the request was a fool's folly, and that Benjen had gone mad. Aemon didn't have a say on the matter, only present in case he was called upon to give advice. Thorne was the only one who had yet to give any of his feelings away. His questions had been brief, and without feeling. His face was like a stone mask. If you do this, you do this alone, Thorne said finally. I will not send rangers to help you, nor will I send them after you, should you go missing. Understood, Benjen said. And you plan to leave the day after next, Thorne said. I do, Benjen answered. I will ride with Jon and the others to Craster's before making my way further north. I still don't understand why we're helping the boy. Slanton muttered darkly. Slant, who is the king of the Seven Kingdoms? Benjen asked curiously. The boy Robb Stark, Slant answered without a second thought to who he was speaking to. I'd be careful about referring to him as a boy, Benjen advised with mock politeness. You see, he's my nephew and he's Jon's brother. And between you and me, if you let the man with the wolf the size of a pony hear you, your frog-like face is likely to be mauled. Though the only person who feels bad about it will be you because Ghost will be saving the rest of us from ever seeing it again. Slits blanched, but Benjen wasn't through. Furthermore, House Stark has always been and will continue to be the Watch's most ardent supporters. Are you willing to look me in the eye and tell me that the Watch has received more help from the previous four rulers, the Mad King, Robert, Joffrey, and the Targaryens than it has from Robb Stark? All eyes were on Slant, who looked ready to piss himself and shout at the same time. It was an odd look that strangely looked right on the man. No, he finally managed. No indeed, Benjen snarled, dropping the niceties. Listen closely, because I won't repeat myself. You are only in this room because you are a leech stuck to our unfortunate Lord Commander. Your opinion holds no weight and means shit to everyone here. Corin Halfhand is feared by the wildlings. Yarok and Marsh have ensured for decades that this castle remains strong enough to withstand the elements in an attack. You have done nothing but kill children, lick the arse of Sir Eliezer, and stand on your own bloated pride. Now you will not speak nor make a single fucking sound for the rest of the meeting. Is that clear? Slayton gazed into Benjen's eyes and did not like what he found there. He nodded quickly and scooted a little further away from the man. Benjen just stared in disgust at the man before returning to his original point. We are helping Lord Jon because he is a Stark, and here to help us, Benjen said. Salent. Leave, Thorne said. The man looked in surprise at the Lord Commander, growing red, but Leave! Thorne barked. Slayton nodded quickly and left with the dignity he thought he had. When he was gone, Thorne turned his gaze on Benjen. He did not look overly supportive of Benjen's plan, but he was still respectful of the First Ranger's wishes.
I'll be plain.
First Ranger, I do not like your plan, nor do I like your nephew making peace with the wildlings, Thorne grumbled, but very rarely have you ever done anything that you did not think was right. A courtesy I will extend to your nephews and brother. As I understand, he was the one who ordered his son to speak with Raider. He was, Benjen confirmed. He, like myself, believes that there is something worse than wildlings beyond the wall. I'm unsure of how he learned this information, but Jon will follow his orders regardless of the Watch's feelings. What does the king think? Yarok asked. I am unsure if King Robb knows what Jon or my brother knows, Benjen admitted. But if he sees proof, then he will believe. As will we all, Thorne said. You have made your case. First Ranger, and we will indulge you. Though remember what I said. This is your mission alone, and we will not look for you, if you are presumed dead. Benjen nodded. Very well. Robb Stark. Robb grunted as he parried his opponent, moving to his left as he did. The other fighter turned as well, readying himself before launching himself at the King of Westeros. The two men went back and forth for a few minutes before Robb saw his opening and tripped his opponent, leveling his blade at the man's throat, a tired smile on his face. You almost had me, Robb. Robb chuckled, helping his Kingsguard up. Almost, my lord, the young knight laughed, accepting the king's help. If I may be so bold, I sometimes forget how great a warrior you are. Robb grinned before putting a finger to his lips. Don't tell anyone, or else Brienne may get jealous. Fear not, my lord. I'll be just fine, the Kingsguard commander called. She, the Blackfish, Olyvar, and Greywind, was standing in the shadow cast by the wall, staying well out of the heat. Robb and Robber laughed, making their way over to the others. Olyvar quickly made his way over to the king, helping him out of his armor. Thank you, Olyvar, Robb said, and thank you, Robbar, for sparring with me. Think nothing of it, Robber said with a slight bow. Iron sharpens iron, as they say. Your Grace, the Grand Maester has requested your presence when you have time, Brienne said. The messenger did not say what Maester Samuel wanted to speak about, only that it had to do with the North and their brother Jon. Robb nodded. Very well. Allow me to bathe and I will meet with the Grand Maester. True to his word, Robb, dressed in fresh clothes and wet hair, was outside the door to Sam's office in an hour. Behind him were Brienne and Sarah Balon. Greywind had elected to stay behind with Margaery and Torrhen. Something he did often. For whatever reason, Robb felt that there was an understanding between the wolf and Brienne. Greywind trusted the commander to protect Robb, allowing him to watch over the queen and prince. It made sense to Robb, but it wasn't an opinion he would ever make public. Robb knocked on the door, waiting patiently as he heard heavy footsteps behind the door. Your Grace, Sam said, please, come in. Robb followed the big maester inside, where he was surprised to find another man, already inside. He was stout with greasy hair and dressed like clansmen in fur and leather. Robb nodded to him. Your Grace, this is Ardos Flint, second son of the Flint, Sam said, introducing the two. Artos, Robb greeted. Artos bowed slightly. Your Grace, Artos is helping me translate the books Jon sent me from his holdfast in the north, Sam explained. They were hidden there by Maester Luwin when he and others left Winterfell. The books are written in the runes of the first men, Artos added. I'm assuming these books came from Winterfell then, Robb said, crossing his arms. I thought the library was destroyed by the Boltons. It was, Sam said. But Jon believes that these books weren't in the library, but in the crypts, and I think I know why. Robb motioned for Sam to continue. These books, or the ones Ardos and I have translated, speak of a time before the Andal invasion, Sam said. Many of them mention the Long Night and the Age of Heroes. Robb raised an eyebrow. You sound shocked. The Citadel is the center of all knowledge in the known world, Your Grace, but one of its shortcomings is that it does not hold much knowledge on the Long Night and the Age of Heroes, other than what is commonly known, Sam explained. For instance, one of these books mentions a man called the Griffin. During the Age of Heroes, there is a warrior known as the Winged Knight. To call attention to the Andal invasion, Artus Arryn defeated the Griffin King atop of the Giant's Lance. I mean that they are all connected, Brienne noted. That there was a House Griffin of some sort that ruled in the Vale during the Age of Heroes and before the Andal invasion. Sam nodded. The Meister who found these books was able to, with the help of Artos here, create a rough summary of each book. I am willing to bet that we might get a real detailed story of what happened during and perhaps before the Long Night. Sam, while that's all well and good, why did you need to tell me this? Robb asked. One of the books is called The Return, Ardos stated bluntly. It talked about another long night happening again. Why would it happen again? Sarah Balon asked, who seemed the most skeptical of all this next to Brienne. To them, the Long Night was closer to a ghost story than actual history. Brain the Builder raised the wall for a reason. Sarah and Sam answered. For your first question, the others weren't destroyed, but they retreated to the far, far north, where no man nor any living thing could follow. Sam, speak plainly. Do you think another long night is coming? Robb said. The Grand Maester hesitated. I am not certain, he admitted, but I believe that it is a possibility. My father sent me a raven that he's having Jon make peace with the wildlings, Robb said. If their story matches up with yours, then we'll see where we are. But for the time being, continue to look into this. But this discussion doesn't leave this room. Why? Artos asked. Because I still have some southern lords questioning if I can rule in the south, Robb said, sounding more than a little annoyed. They don't believe in snarks and grumpkins. This, he gestured to the books, won't be enough. We need proof, Sam said. Definitive proof. Evidence of the others that cannot be dismissed. Robb corrected. Send a raven to Jon or Winterfell. There's obviously something happening in the north that I don't have the full details on. Both Sam and Ardos nodded. Robb knew that the message had gotten to them and went to leave, but Sam stopped him. Sire, what if the long night does happen? What then? Robb looked over the shoulder at the large maester. That's rather definitive proof, don't you think? Line break. Are you all right? Margaery asked as Robb pushed his plate away. Yes, Robb said quietly, slumping in his chair and resting his head in his hand. Just thinking about my conversation with Sam. What was it about? Margaery asked, taking a sip of her wine. Robb glanced at her. You're going to find out regardless if I tell you or not, won't you? Margaery gave her husband an amused look and took his hand. I thought you knew me by now. I always find out. Robb chuckled and sat up. Jon sent Sam these books that were written in the language of the First Men. He even had a mountain clansman, the son of Lord Flint, accompany the books to help translate them. That was kind of him, Margaery said, knowing how inquisitive the Grand Maester was. I'm sure Sam will enjoy the challenge. I'm sure he has, Robb agreed. But the books? Sam is worried about what they might mean. What would that be? Margaery asked. Apparently, those books were hidden at Long Lake by Maester Luwin, the old maester of Winterfell who died on the road to Last Hearth, Robb explained. What's weird is that those books weren't in the library, but Jon said that they might have been in the crypts. That doesn't make sense, Margaery said, ignoring her own food now. I thought the Boltons put Winterfell to the torch. So these books were so important that they had to be put somewhere where even if the castle was destroyed, they wouldn't be harmed. Robb nodded. Exactly. What's in them? If they're written in the runes of the First Men, then they must be old. Older than the Andal invasion. Robb sighed. Sam and Artos, the clansmen, haven't read through all the books, but the ones they have gone through detail the time around the Long Night and the Age of Heroes. Is there a lot of information on that time period? Margie asked. Not according to Sam, Robb answered. All that's known by the maesters is what is commonly known to everyone else. Robb, Margaery said, looking carefully at her husband. What's in those books that worries you? Robb rubbed his jaw. Sam believes that, with winter coming, that there'll be another long night. Margaery gazed at Robb for a long moment before speaking. And you're worried because you believe him. I shouldn't, Robb said quietly. I know I shouldn't, but I can't help but believe. Every time I think it over in my head, it makes sense. The wildlings, the reason Luwin saved the books, winter coming, but coincidence won't prove anything, nor will gut feelings. That worked during the war, but given the situation, nothing but the definite, inexcusable proof will work. You told Sam this, Margaery said. I did, Robb nodded. I told him that he is not to speak about this with anyone other than my father and Jon. I think they might have the same belief as Sam. Why's that? My father sent me a raven, saying that he's asked Jon to make peace with the wildlings, Robb explained. He wouldn't have done that without a very good reason. Is it perhaps he doesn't have the men? Margaery asked. Robb shook his head. No, he knows that I'd march an army, north if needed. This is different. Margaery wiped her mouth before pushing her plate away. So what do we do now? Robb looked at his wife. We wait. There's nothing else we can do. If word gets out that I believe the long night is coming, how many lords do you think the High Sparrow will rally to have me removed from the throne? Margaery thought for a moment. Perhaps the long night is not so far-fetched. Robb raised an eyebrow. What makes you say that? Well, dragons are back in Westeros. Renly was killed with shadow magic. As you say, it's all coincidence, but it's something, Margaery answered easily. But I think you're right that this is something that should be kept silent. Robb tapped the table for a second as a thought came to him. I have an idea. Margaery chuckled. You look like you have one. Robb allowed himself a small smile. Margaery always managed to make any moment, no matter how bad or strange, a little easier to be in. A few words, and she was able to coax a smile from even the dourest man. The one subject that we've been dancing around is magic, Robb explained. Sam never brought it up, nor have you or I, but it's there, we just haven't acknowledged it. Fair point, Margaery conceded. I think I know a place where I might be able to get answers, Robb said slowly. The Isle of Faces. Why do you think you'll find answers there? Margaery asked. I've had Encounters with the old gods before, Robb admitted. The green men might be able to help figure all this out. And if not, then we can't say that we haven't tried everything. And it's better than waiting for answers from men on the other side of the continent, Margaery added. When will you leave? Tomorrow, Robb said immediately. No sense in putting it off. Besides, you're more than capable of handling the King's Council. Margaery smiled slightly. I do have some experience with that. The High Sparrow. He found the disgraced knight sleeping in a barn 10 miles north of the city. His nose had been badly reset, and his face showed signs of the stress and humiliation he had endured. He was dressed in ill-fitting commoner clothing, a gift of the kind farmer and his wife who had taken the man in exchange for his help in the fields. Ser Harrison Jas had fallen far indeed. Wake up, the High Sparrow ordered. His voice caused the ex-knight to sit up and immediately reach for a weapon he no longer had. His chest was heaving with adrenaline as he laid eyes on the old man garbed in a rough tunic before him. Who are you? He asked, sounding scared. The High Sparrow gave the man a warm, friendly smile. I am just a simple servant of the gods, he answered. You are Harrison Jas, are you not? The man nodded slowly. I am. What do you want? You have had some trouble with Robb Stark, have you not? The High Sparrow asked, already knowing the answer. Would you like to strike back against him? Jas hesitated before nodding. I would. The High Sparrow offered his hand, helping the man to his feet and leading him out of the barn, where the rest of the Septon's men were waiting. 5 warriors' sons, garbed in silver armor over hair shirts under rainbow cloaks. Their sword pommels were adorned with a star-shaped crystal. One of the knights held another set of armor while another held a sword and shield. The High Sparrow took the sword, turning towards Jas, who was eyeing the weapon worriedly. Kneel, he ordered. Jas did as he was ordered, still looking very confused. The High Sparrow touched his shoulder with the flat of the blade. In the name of the warrior, I charge you to be brave. In the name of the father, I charge you to be just. In the name of the mother, I charge you to defend the young and innocent. In the name of the maid, I charge you to protect all women. As the High Sparrow said the words, making the man a knight once more, he could see confidence flow once more into Jas. When the High Sparrow was finished, he said, Stand, Ser Harrison. Jas. Septon Harrison stood, his back straight and his shoulders square, the light of religious fervor burning bright in his eyes. He bowed deeply to the High Sparrow. Thank you, Your Holiness. I merely rectified a wrong, the High Sparrow replied. The savage upon the throne had no right to strip you of a gift given by the Seven. What shall be done with him? Ser Harrison asked. The man rides for the Isle of Faces to seek advice from the pagan trees, the High Sparrow spat. He shall not return to the throne. Robb Stark. Robb left early in the morning before the sun had even risen in the sky, and only shades of red and purple broke through the night sky, slipping out through the mudgate with Brienne and Robb in tow. All 3 wore simple cloaks and rode nondescript horses to help give them the appearance of simple travelers. To complete the look, Robb even wore a pack slung across his back that was simply a burlap sack filled with food. In every way, they looked nothing like the king and Kingsguard they were. Ser Davos nodded to them as they left. The only other person besides the Queen that knew about Robb's departure. Robb worried that if word got to the High Sparrow, he would cause trouble, and that's the last thing Robb wanted to deal with. Robb's true worry with the High Sparrow was that he would rebuild the Faith Militant, an army of religious fanatics and zealots that had come about after the Conqueror's death centuries ago. Ever since their initial uprising and subsequent downfall, Robb's predecessors have kept a close eye on the Sept Baelor. As the saying goes, keep your friends close, and your enemies closer. He already had a start with his sparrows, which were nothing but fanatical thugs. As far as Alec knew and had shared with the rest of the small council, there were close to 50 sparrows at the High Sparrow disposal. And besides preaching across the city, they also acted as an honor guard whenever the High Sparrow left the confines of the Sept of Baelor. Robb knew that Alec would tell the council if the High Sparrow did try to rebuild the band organization. If such a thing did happen, Robb would see it reduced to dust without hesitation. The 3 riders traveled till the sun was at its peak before getting off the road and having lunch of cold ham, bread, and apples. Even though their departure was unknown to all but a few, Brienne insisted on maintaining constant watch. Brienne, there's no one who knows we're gone, Robb said, sitting comfortably with his back to a tree as he munched on his apple. After years of riding under the banner of his house, the feeling of freedom that Robb felt now was electric. Also, you know as well as I that Lord Royce has regular patrols sweeping up and down the road. Lord Royce, gaining a bit of inspiration from Daemon Targaryen, who is known as the Lord Flea Bottom, ensured that the law extended well beyond the walls of the city. Patrols were usually composed of hedge knights or other warriors searching for a bit of coin and food. Robb wasn't sure on the exact number the Lord of Runstone had under his command, but Robb knew that it was a good few hundred men who lived in a barracks just outside the city that was equipped with its own stable and kitchen. Although the Crown was still paying off their debt to the Iron Bank, House Tyrell had no problem paying for such a luxury. "Men are not infallible, Your Grace," Brienne responded, glaring at the woods around them, her hand on her sword. "Who knows, Your Grace, we may come across that Harrison Jass person again." Robb joked, though why he would ever face Brienne again is beyond me. "If he's smart, he'll have moved far away by now," Robb grunted, getting to his feet. "I doubt there's a single lord in the Crownlands or Southern Riverlands that'll allow him to enter their service. He's better served going to Essos." "Have the sellsword companies reformed already?" Robb asked curiously. Robb shook his head as he checked his horse's saddle. "Lys, Myr and Tyrosh are still quite angry with us, because of what happened with the sellsword companies. The only one who walked away with any semblance of power was the Golden Company, but they only have a tenth of what they started with." "Didn't they break a contract to join the Targaryens?" Robb asked as the three riders mounted. "Aye, they did. So they're in hot water with the free cities and are not as strong as they used to be," Robb explained, "though I am afraid of what might happen now." "What do you mean?" Robb asked as they rode. "Braavos has taken control of Pentos, an easy task since Daenerys left a power void when she and her cousin sailed to Westeros," Robb explained. "Coar, Lorath, and Norvos have remained unchanging. It's Myr, Tyrosh, and Lys that I worry about. They relied heavily on sellswords to fight their battles. I worry that a dominant power such as Volantis might sweep in and take it all." Robb and Robb's conversation was cut short when Brienne drew her sword. While the two men spoke, they didn't notice the 9 individuals coming onto the road ahead of them. They were all dressed in rough brown tunics, with shaved heads and 7-pointed stars engraved on their foreheads. They all carried an assortment of weapons from axes to cudgels to spears. 2 even had crossbows cocked and ready. "Robb Stark, you are ordered to halt what you are doing and surrender yourself and your companions to the High Septon," one man with a crossbow called. Robb slowly drew his sword. "Is the High Sparrow so bold that he believes that he can command the king of Westeros? Put down your weapons and come peacefully," the man answered, lifting his crossbow. "We will use force." Robb flicked the reins on his horse, who started off at a slow trot before picking up the pace till it was a thundering charge. Brienne and Robb were not far behind him, their swords drawn. The 2 men shot their crossbows, but Robb was able to swerve out of the way of both before he reached the small knot of men. His horse sent 2 men sprawling as Robb cut down one of the crossbowmen, claw carving effortlessly through the man's shoulder and into his chest. He ripped his sword from the dying man, stabbing it into a man on his left side who was preparing to stab at him with a spear. In a matter of moments, Robb had killed 2 and sent another 2 to the ground. In the same amount of time, Brienne and Robert had taken care of the other 5. Altogether, 7 lay dead on the road, while the 2 who had been thrown aside by Robb's horse remained alive. "What will we do with them?" Robb asked. Robb moved towards one of the downed men, who glared at Robb with absolute hatred. Robb placed the tip of his blade just under the man's throat, leaning down from his saddle so that he could see the man's face clearly. "Run back to your nest, Sparrow, and tell your master that he better pray for mercy when I return," Robb growled. "He and I will have words, and I assure you now that they will not be pleasant." "He will never bow to a pagan king," the Sparrow spat. "He'll save us from you tree worshippers, and guide Westeros with the light of the 7. Robb glanced at Brienne, who seemed to be having the same thoughts as him. They were facing the same problem that they had when dealing with Stannis Baratheon, except for this time, they were facing an old man and his small force of 50 thugs, and not an experienced, battle-hardened commander with 20,000 Stormlanders at his back. Still, even a small group houses so close to the Red Keep can be deadly. "Leave," Robb snapped, "and tell the High Sparrow that if he loves the 7 so much, then I will be more than happy to help him meet the stranger." Without another word, Robb wiped his bloody blade on the fanatic's robe before sheathing it and riding off, leaving the carnage behind. It would serve as a reminder to the other men the High Sparrow sent after Robb. Wolves do not fear sparrows. Line break. The trio rode for the rest of that day, before finding an inn and paying for a room. Robber and Brienne shared watch duty, while Robb slept, but Robb had insisted that they take the bed while he settled for a pile of hay covered with a thick blanket and a pillow. Both Kingsguard had tried to resist, but Robb had settled the debate when he fell onto the hay and went to sleep. The next morning, after breaking their fast at the inn, they pushed their mounts hard and reached the God's Eye just after midday. On the south side of the lake was a small village that had no more than half a dozen buildings and a few rowboats pulled up on the shore. Robb stopped next to a woman, giving her a pleasant smile. "Hello, can you tell me where your headsman is?" The woman nodded. "Joshua is at the shore of the lake." Robb smiled at her and gave her a gold dragon before riding off. True to her word, they found Joshua at the lake in the middle of a heated discussion with another man who had a long white beard and clothes that were patched in odd places. It was a little obvious that he wasn't the headsman. "Joshua?" Robb asked, dismounting. Joshua was a broad-shouldered man with a brown beard that was sprinkled with gray and a shaved head. His arms and legs looked well-muscled, probably from years rowing and swimming in the lake. "Aye, that's me," he answered with a suspicious look. "Who's asking?" "My name is Robb," Robb answered. "I was wondering if my friends and I could get passage across the lake to the Isle of Faces." The old man's jaw dropped open as he gazed at Robb before dropping to a knee. Joshua did the same, bowing his head as he did. Robb quickly helped both men back to their feet. "Please, that's not necessary. Forgive us, Your Grace, but we did not think that you would come," Joshua said apologetically. "That's what I and Ellen were talking about." "What do you mean you didn't think he'd come?" Brienne asked. Joshua glanced at the large woman and the sword she had half drawn before answering. "I meant no offense," Joshua said hurriedly. "Len delivers food for the green men. You see, during his last delivery he said to look out for a wolf and his pack. We weren't sure what he meant, but since the king is called the young wolf, you see what we thought." "Understandable," Robb said with an easy smile. "Alin, would you be willing to give my friends and I passage?" "Of course, Your Grace," Olin said with a crooked smile. "It'd be an honor." "I'll take care of your horses," Joshua offered. "Olin will bring you to find me when you return." "Thank you, both of you," Robb said. "Joshua, please do not tell anyone that you've seen me." Joshua bowed. "Of course, Your Grace." Daenerys Targaryen, the Lady of Dragonstone, was met at the harbor by an older man whose brown hair was flecked with silver and gray. He wore simple leather and wool clothes of brown and black, under a brown woolen mantle. The only sign of armor on him was the dark chainmail he wore over his woolen shirt and under his leather tunic. He carried a sword at his side and had a small squad of gold cloaks at his back. Regardless of his common appearance, the man had an air of authority. "Lady Daenerys," he greeted, bowing slightly. "We did not expect you." "I did not expect to be here," Daenerys answered. "I wish to see the king." Something flickered in the man's eye before he nodded. "Of course. I did not know how many you had with you, so I had 5 extra horses brought." "3 will be just fine," Daenerys said, glancing over her shoulder at Barristan and Jorah. The man glanced at the 2 knights, nodding slightly before motioning for them to follow. 2 watchmen grabbed the 2 extra horses and walked them away, while Daenerys, Barristan, Jorah, and the man mounted, with the gold cloaks marching beside them. They began to make their way towards the castle. "Forgive me, sir, but I did not get your name," Daenerys said. "Davos, my lady," Davos answered kindly. "Sir Davos Seaworth," Sir Barristan said. "You are Stannis' right-hand man." Davos nodded. "Aye, I was. After his death, his grace offered me a place in his service. I think it's worked out rather well." "As a gold cloak?" Daenerys asked curiously. "He's our commander, my lady," the guard marching beside her corrected quietly. Davos gave Daenerys a small smile. There was something likable about the older man and his modest apparel. The commander of the gold cloaks was a coveted position of power. Yet the man looked closer to a common sailor than a commander. "I grew up in Flea Bottom, my lady," Davos said as if reading her thoughts. "I know this city like the back of my hand. It makes sense, really." I'm rather surprised that you weren't made master of ships. Ser Barristan chuckled. I'd say you know just as much about them as you do about the city. Why do you say that? Daenerys asked, feeling like there was some inside joke between the two knights. I was a smuggler before I entered Lord Stannis' service, my lady, Davos explained. That's quite a jump, Daenerys noted. How did that happen? Davos blushed slightly, obviously uncomfortable with being the center of attention. I snuck past the red wine blockade and delivered salted fish and onions to the people inside Storm's End, he explained. I couldn't sleep knowing that women and children could die. Very noble of you, Setter, Daenerys praised. Aye, noble, but I still had a price to pay for my years as a smuggler, Davos said, holding up one hand. I lost the first 5 joints on my left hand. That must have been tough, Daenerys said. The odd knight shrugged. The physical pain meant nothing, because my family has a much better life because of it. Ser Davos, one of the Kingsguard said, walking out of the keep and into the courtyard. Obviously someone must have notified the castle that Daenerys had landed in the city. Lady Targaryen. Serene Harbor? Davos nodded. Lady Daenerys had requested a meeting with the king. The Kingsguard nodded. Very well, the queen is currently in a meeting, but I believe she should be out soon. Daenerys resisted the urge to tell the knight that she was unwilling to wait. She still had habits that she developed in Essos, that she thought she needed to be queen, and she certainly wasn't used to being told to wait, but she had to remind herself that Margaery was queen now, and nothing could be done about it. The queen? Ser Barristan asked. Where is the king? He is currently occupied, Ser Harbor answered. You'll have to speak with the queen. Very well, Daenerys said easily. We will wait till she is done with her meeting. Thank you, Hogan. Here we'll show you to your rooms. Harbor gesturing to the servant who Daenerys just noticed. She was beginning to wonder if she was right to come back to the city. Line break? Lady Targaryen, the queen said politely, greeting Daenerys and her companions. What do I owe the pleasure? Daenerys took a moment to look around the room. The king's giant wolf lay next to the fire, though his lantern-like eyes were trained on the Lady of Dragonstone. It was as large as a pony, and she wondered how the beast was able to walk through the castle. As always, the queen looked effortlessly radiant. Your Grace, Daenerys said, speaking to Margaery. I am sorry to arrive unannounced. Quite all right, Margaery said with a smile. It's nice to see a new face. Would you like some wine? Please, Daenerys answered. One of your Kingsguard, Septur Haber. Septur Barristan said, helpfully. Sarah Haber, Daenerys corrected, said that the king was currently occupied. Margaery nodded. Indeed. It was obvious that Margaery wasn't going to tell where the king was, or what he was doing. Daenerys fought the urge to continue to press the queen for an answer. She was still surprised that she had been allowed into the castle, let alone an audience with the queen. I found something on Dragonstone that I thought the king and the Grand Maester would have liked to see. Daenerys explained, nodding to Ser Jorah, who produced the sketch by Pylos. The northerner passed the picture to the queen, who regarded it with a curious expression. Loras, Margaery called. The door opened to reveal another Kingsguard, but one who had his helmet off. Daenerys recognized him as the knight who had dueled Emery Lorch and won. Daenerys had not had a proper chance to look at the man, but he was remarkably handsome and reminded Daenerys slightly of the queen, with his hair and eyes. It was not hard to see that the knight and the queen were siblings. Can you please summon the Grand Maester? Margaery asked. Loras bowed and closed the door. When he was gone, Margaery continued. Before we go further, I believe Samwell should be here for anything else that's said about the picture. Very well, Daenerys said. The 4 nobles sat in awkward silence, waiting for the Grand Maester to arrive. There was a palpable tension between the 2 women, and neither wanted to bring it up. One was a former queen and the other was the current queen. Both were used to holding the power of the crown, but now that power belonged to Margaery, the woman who had everything Daenerys had ever wanted. A husband, a child, and a crown. Thankfully, it was Ser Barristan, who broke the silence. The city seems to be flourishing, my lady. Margaery smiled. Thank you, Sarah, but I cannot take all the credit. Sarah Davos, Lord Royce, and Lord Tyrion have played a hand as well. I saw the beginnings of Valancel sewers. Ser Jorah noted. Margaery nodded. Good eye, Setch. I invited Master Eros from Volantis to see if the city could be improved. I'm hoping that the sewers will do away with the awful smell. Lord Tyrion and the Master Architect have been hard at work on the project. Why did you assign Lord Tyrion this task? Daenerys asked. He is said to have fixed the drains and sewers of Casterly Rock, Margaery answered. Besides that, he is one of the most intelligent men I have ever come across. I doubt there is any such challenge that he could not accomplish. At that moment, the door opened to reveal a fat, thin-haired man who wore the robes and chain of a maester. Behind him was a fur-clad younger man who carried just as many books as the maester. Margaery graced them both with a smile. Grand Maester, Artos, thank you for arriving so quickly. The Grand Maester bowed slightly, setting the books down on a nearby table. Your Grace, he said before turning to Daenerys. My lady and sitters, Samwell, Lady Daenerys has brought a drawing from Dragonstone that I believe you should have a look at, Margaery explained. It might be connected with your current study. The Maester looked confused for a second before he realized what the Queen meant and nodded quickly. Right, yes, thank you. Daenerys handed the picture to the man, who narrowed his eyes slightly and gazed at the picture, analyzing it. After a while, he looked back up at Daenerys, a curious look back on his face. Where was this found exactly? Painted on a wall inside of a cave on the beach, Daenerys said, nodding to Sarah Barristan, who added another item to the table. This was also found as well. Samwell picked up the object, once again narrowing his eyes. Given the wrinkles around his eyes, Daenerys felt that it was something he did often whenever he was looking or reading something. This is dragonglass, he said finally. Sir Barristan nodded. It's a broken arrowhead. What's the connection between the picture and the arrowhead? Margaery asked. The others were fought with weapons made from dragonglass. The fur-clad man named Artos answered bluntly. Did your maester find anything in the library about this? Samwell asked, looking at Daenerys. She shook her head. He was unable to find anything about the cave, though there were marks in the cave itself that showed mining, so someone knew about it some point in time. What were the walls made of? Samwell asked immediately. Daenerys thought for a moment. I'm not sure. Sam? Margaery prompted, obviously wanting to know what the man was thinking. Forgive me, your grace, my lady, but I was thinking that Dragonstone might have been one place where the children of the forest got dragonglass, Samwell explained. The painting may very well be a marking of some sort, that the cave may be where one can mine and collect dragonglass. There was no mention of this cave in the library, on the island. Margaery asked, looking at Daenerys. Ser Jorah shook his head. The maester wasn't able to find any recordings of it ever being found. I have been on the island many times and have never noticed it myself. Sarah Barristan added, it was Lady Daenerys who found the cave, though that action itself may also be due to luck. It was a feeling, Daenerys corrected, but Sarah Barristan is right. I didn't spot it till I was well past it. The opening is tricky to find. You must be looking at it from just the right angle. Other than that, it just looked like a cleft or something. Certainly not a cave. The queen tapped the table thoughtfully with a finger. Daenerys remembered seeing Robb do the same thing whenever he was mulling things over in his mind. For the first time, Daenerys was struck by the similarities between Robb Stark and his queen. Both were smart and decisive with their orders, and they never allowed any conversation they were a part of get away from them. Somehow, they always managed to take control of every aspect of their surroundings. Sam, do you think that this is connected to your findings and beliefs from your studies? The maester looked skeptical, but it was Artos who stepped forward and answered. Your grace, perhaps it is not a coincidence, but the work of the gods, the old gods. Daenerys frowned. What do you mean? I believe what my friend means is that yes, they may be connected, Sam answered quickly. He nodded to Daenerys. Thank you for bringing this, my lady. It is very helpful. Is the long night coming? Ser Jorah blurted out. The room was instantly silenced as everyone turned to look at the knight, who turned slightly red from embarrassment. For a moment, Daenerys felt that they were about to be laughed out of the room, until the queen answered. Her tone was grave and honest. Perhaps, she said simply, the king and Sam here are looking into that possibility. It is something we were hoping to keep silent. Why is that? Daenerys asked curiously. Many in the south are followers of the Seven, Margaery explained. They do not believe in, well, snarks and grumpkins, as they would call it. We wanted to find physical proof before taking any steps. What are those steps? Ser Jorah asked. The king's father and brother are currently working on that, Marguerite responded, not exactly answering Jorah's questions. However, the king wishes this to be kept silent to avoid mass panic and religious uproar. I hope that you all respect that wish. Daenerys shook her head stubbornly. I still don't understand why it must be kept secret. This is a matter of the kingdom's safety. Sir Barristan laid a gentle hand on her arm. My lady, many in the south don't believe that the others exist. The Archmasters still argue if they did at all, Samwell added quietly. Sir Barristan nodded. This is a very precarious situation that the Queen and King can't rush into without proof that this threat is real. They would lose all credibility with their southern subjects. The fact that they're taking this seriously is better than what most kings in the past 50 years would do. Ser Jorah grunted before glancing at Daenerys and going quiet. This painting and the books that Sam has won't be enough, Margaery said. I understand that this is a very important matter, and the king and I are treating it as such, but there are hundreds of thousands of others who don't. We are already having trouble with the faith, as it is. The High Sparrow, Daenerys said. He's been threatening to revive the faith militant, Margaery sighed. The king refuses to convert, and so it has caused some problems. If it got out that we were preparing for the long night to return, most of Westeros would look at us like we're stupid, and the other small, more angry portion would raise the banners of the faith militant and try to drag my husband off the throne. Bloody fanatics. Ortas muttered. What can I do to help? Daenerys asked. With the faith, Margaery responded. Daenerys shook her head and gestured to the sketch. With this, Margaery looked at Sam. Grand Maester, you're the unofficial know-all on this. How can Lady Daenerys help? Sam hesitated before answering. The first would be to start mining dragonglass, he said. We will need a lot of it should the long night come. Where should I send it? Daenerys asked. The Night's Watch, Sam answered. That's where this will be fought, and that's where it will be needed the most. Anything else? Daenerys asked. Your dragons, Sam said. Daenerys frowned, her mental hackles raised. What about them? They'll be needed. Invaluable even, Sam said, not noticing Daenerys' guarded tone. He finished with a slight grin. If we're fighting creatures of myth, it'll help that we have some of our own. Daenerys relaxed slightly. Very well. Margaery looked between her and the Grand Maester before bringing the meeting to an end. You are welcome to stay, my lady, and thank you for bringing this to our attention. Of course, Daenerys said. My duty is still to the realm. The words, even if I am not the queen, hung unsaid in the air between the two women.
Jaime.
Lannister. The sight of the Red Keep brought a strange sensation to Jaime. For so many years, it had been a welcome sight because he knew that he was returning to Cersei. At the same time, he also hated the bloody castle because of all that he had witnessed while protecting the madman. Now, Jaime wasn't sure what to feel. Tommen and he rode at the front of a small group of a dozen guardsmen. Tommen was dressed in clothes fitting his station as Tyrion's heir. He wore a red and gold doublet, black pants, and a fine red cloak that was clasped at his throat with a roaring lion's head. He carried an arming sword at his side, its hilt decorated with gold. Shaime, on the other hand, wore a dull red cloak with the hood up. Under it, he wore practical black and red leathers and black chainmail. As always, his long sword hung at his waist opposite of a heavy-bladed dagger. For once, he was happy not to be wearing the white armor of the Kingsguard. It always brought too much attention to him. The group easily picked its way through the bustle of the city streets, which were cleaner than Jaime had ever seen them before. When Joffrey had been king, Jaime had heard rumors of the populace starving and that there were more beggars than gold under the rock. It had been a woeful sight that showed just how much Joffrey had neglected his people. Tyrion had called it the picture of poverty, neglect, and sorrow. The same could not be said for Robb Stark. The streets were clean and filled with contented men, women, and children, going about their daily business. Groups of gold cloaks marched through the streets, the very embodiment of authority and order. Jaime passed more than a few taverns and brothels, and he never once saw a gold cloak or any other city officials inside. The city was obviously flourishing under the Young Wolf and the Rose Queen. Uncle, what are they building there? Tommen asked, pointing towards a building site. Jaime looked at the half-completed structure before shrugging and shaking his head. I have no idea. Tyrion will know. Jaime had his reservations about returning to the scene of his greatest triumph and equally greatest failure, but he couldn't fight the fact that he was excited to see his brother again. It had been months since they had seen each other in person, and Jaime knew that Tyrion would want to sit alone and pass a pitcher of wine between them as they caught up properly. Thankfully, Jaime had plenty of experience dealing with his drunk brother. Tyrion met the party in the main courtyard of the castle, a beaming smile plastered to his face. Pod, his squire, stood behind him, his hands folded respectfully behind his back. Another man was with him as well, pinch-faced and dressed in official-looking clothing. "Nephew brother, welcome back," Tyrion said happily. Tommen was the first to dismount, walking quickly up to his uncle and getting down on one knee so that he could embrace Tyrion. "My God, you've grown, lad." Tyrion laughed. "What did I say when you were a boy? You'll be bigger than the Hound." "It's great to see you, uncle," Tommen greeted. "Thank you for all your letters." "Of course," Tyrion replied before turning to Jaime, who had dismounted and was waiting for his turn to greet his brother. "Jaime? No? Hello for your favorite brother?" Jaime chuckled and shook his head. "You're my only brother, Tyrion. All the more reason for me to be your favorite." Tyrion said matter-of-factly, "I am a rarity." "You certainly are." Jaime chuckled before embracing his brother. "This is Leopold, the king's steward," Tyrion said, gesturing to the pinch-faced man behind him. "He will see to your guards and your luggage." "Thank you," Tommen said, nodding gratefully to the man. "Of course, my lord," Leopold responded before barking orders to the small group of servants waiting off to the side. Come, Tyrion said, ushering Jaime and Tommen inside. "We have a lot to catch up on." "Line break." "He's good," Tyrion commented as he and Jaime watched the Blackfish train Tommen. "A credit to your training, to be sure." "Thank you," Jaime said. "He's a good lad. Smart, kind, getting better with a sword each day. He'll be a good lord of the Rock." "How are things here?" Tyrion sighed. "Not all that bad, all things considered. A little problem with the faith. But other than that, Robb Stark has been nothing short of amazing. His queen seems to have 1,000 ideas a day, and they're all brilliant." "Tommen and I passed a construction site on the way here," Jaime said, remembering Tommen's question. "Is that one of the queen's plans?" "It is indeed," Tyrion nodded. "She's finally decided to do something about the smell that hangs over the city. She hired an SSI architect from Volantis, and the three of us have been working on plans for a sewer system." Jaime raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. I assume her plans don't stop with sewers." "She's a Tyrell. They are never content with one thing," Tyrion joked. "She had plans to improve the harbor, the castle, the gardens, the streets, the gates, and the walls. I think the king will want to put in his own input with that last one." "Naturally," Jaime said. "I guess I should thank him for allowing me to leave the Rock." "You can if you want. I'm sure you won't care if you don't." Tyrion shrugged. "Why do you say that?" Jaime asked. Tyrion shrugged again. "He's from the north. They're different up there." Below them, the door from the armory opened, and 4 men exited. They all wore pale armor and had white cloaks that swirled around their feet. 3 of them carried swords and shields. The 4th had a morning star and a shield. "The King's Guard," Tyrion said. "Sarah Hobber, Redwine, Sarah Garth Hightower, Sarah Roland Storm, and Sarah Balin Swan, I believe." "Good knights," Jaime grunted. He knew most of them by name, if not by reputation. He had knocked all of them off their horses at some point.
"Who are the other 3 again?"
"Setter Robar Royce and Setter Loras Tyrell. Brienne of Tarth is the commander." Tyrion answered. "Who is Brienne of Tarth?" Jaime asked curiously. The name rang a faint bell in Jaime's mind. "The daughter of Lord Tarth," Tyrion said. "She's quite ferocious. Beat the blazes out of a man just a few weeks ago." "Stark put a woman in the King's Guard?" Jaime asked, shocked. "Made her Lord Commander on top of it all," Tyrion added, although the title is now referred to simply as the Commander of the King's Guard. "Don't scoff at her appointment. She's a very good fighter. She might even give you a challenge, though I am not ready to admit that she is better." That meant something to Jaime. He knew that Tyrion regarded him as the best warrior in the realm, and compared most fighters to Jaime to judge their skill. If he said that this Brienne woman would give him a challenge, then she had to be extremely skilled. "Daemoy Lannister," a voice called up from the arena. The 2 Lannister brothers looked down to see who was calling for Daima. It was Ser Alland. He and the other 4 Kingsguard were looking up at the former knight. "Care to train with us?" Jaime raised an eyebrow and shrugged. Very well, I'll be down in a few moments. Septon Roland nodded. Armor is in the armory, he said, before turning back to his brothers-in-arms. Jaime looked at Tyrion. A woman in the Kingsguard. A Stark ruling competently in the south. Now miracles do happen. Jon Stark. Craster's keep was far from an actual stronghold. The hall was long and low, surrounded by a few smaller buildings protected by an earthen dike. The single gate was decorated with a pair of skulls, one a ram and the other a bear. A skeletal body hung impaled on a spear next to the skulls. It was covered in frozen furs, and Jon could smell the decay coming from it. Jon, using the point of his sword, exposed the face. He didn't recognize the man, but he guessed that he was looking at Craster, the former master of the hall. Who's he? Smalzin asked as the others got closer. Craster, I believe, Jon answered, turning his gaze on the hall. Jon, Alasan, and Small Jon were accompanied by a dozen men of the Night's Watch, a few of whom were stewards. Jon wasn't sure why Sarah Lazar had given him men who weren't rangers. It was only after he set out that he realized that a couple of the men were those who had arrived with Jon more than a year ago. Even when helping Jon, Sarah Lazar still wanted to point out the fact that he had left the watch. Jon thrust Frost into the frozen ground and looked back at the others. When we're inside, spread out. It'll be close quarters, so you best be aware of who and what is around you. What about the women? Ed asked. Edison Tollet, also known as Dolorous Ed, was one of the men Jon had arrived at the wall with. He was a steward for Castle Black, but he had been one of the men picked by Thorne to accompany Jon. He was a sarcastic man with dry black humor. Despite that, he seemed well liked by the others. Jon searched the group. Pipe, he said. It's your duty to get the women out of the hall when the fighting starts. The small watchman with large ears nodded quickly, looking a little relieved that he wouldn't be in the fight. Helping Craster's daughter wives get away from the fighting was the best job for him. The rest of you take a man and put him down, Jon said grimly. I don't care how. What if they kill us? Totter, also known as Toad, asked. Get your ass up and keep fighting, Jon answered, getting a chuckle from the group. Let's go. The group trudged silently through the gate and towards the hall, their weapons at the ready. Jon Alasine and Small Jon marched in front. They were by far the best fighters of the group, although Jon Oslent continued to say that he was a skilled swordsman. The few women who were outside the hall quickly recognized them and looked ready to run, but Jon held up a hand to stop them. The women already had tears running down their faces, over black and purple bruises. Who did this to you? Jon asked quietly, gently grabbing hold of one woman's face to get a better look. The masters, one answered weakly. Jon looked around. Get to one of the pens and stay there. Understood? The women nodded and ran off. Jon watched them go before shrugging his cloak off and throwing it to the side. He wore borrowed black leather and chainmail from the Night's Watch. Small Jon and Aelisane were similarly armored. Jon shoved the door open, striding inside. He was instantly hit by the heat of the burning fire and the smell of sex, unwashed bodies, and vomit. Smoke hung in thick clouds among the rafters, bodies of both men and women laid on the edge of the hall, close enough to reach for food or drink, but far enough away so that the heat of the roaring fire wasn't overpowering. Jon continued further into the room till he was right in front of the fire. Following his orders, the others spread out behind him as he assessed his enemy. Many of the girls sported bruises and cuts on their faces, as well as many other signs of abuse and mistreatment. They had gone from one abusive master to multiple. Jon could only imagine how they had survived so long. Sitting on a throne-like chair, directly across from Jon was a lean, hard-muscled man. He had slick-backed, greasy hair and yellow, crooked teeth. His eyes, in the firelight, looked black. He pushed the woman off his lap and stood, drawing 2 long dirks from his belt. He smiled cruelly at Jon. Well. What do we have here? He asked slowly, as his men also got to their feet and reached for their weapons. Some looked a little unsure on their feet, which boded well for Jon and his men. Jon glared across the fire at the man with the knives, but watched in his peripheral as Peeb gestured for the women to leave, holding the door open for them. Thankfully, none of the armed mutineers noticed the girls as they were too focused on the 12 grim men holding swords. Soon, there was only one woman left, right where the leader had pushed her to the ground. She tried to scramble away, but the deserter stomped on her ankle, causing her to cry out in pain as it cracked painfully. "Let her go," Jon growled. "Come and take her," the man snarled back. "At them!" Jon bellowed. The hall quickly descended into chaos as the brothers of the Night's Watch fought their former comrades. Jon fought the leader in the middle of the hall. He was blindingly fast and extremely skilled with his weapons, giving Jon flashbacks of his fight with Ramsay Snow outside the Dreadfort. Jon was able to keep up with the man, though only just. He was forced to rely on his every instinct and battlefield experience when fighting the man. "Do you know who I am?" the man asked, twisting and flexing his knives. "I don't care," Jon grunted, his sword flashing towards the man's midsection. The mutineer parried with one knife, while slashing at Jon's face with the other. Jon just managed to evade the attack, taking a few steps back and bringing Frost back up. The two men threw themselves at each other again, going blow for blow, each using the advantage their weapons gave them. Jon had better reach and superior steel, but his opponent knew how to make Jon uncomfortable by continually moving inside the reach of Jon's sword. After a while, the two finally locked weapons, turning the battle into a test of strength. Both men were young and strong, but Jon was beginning to have the better of the exchange. "You know what your problem is?" the man asked suddenly, smiling wildly. Jon grimaced, keeping his attention on the knives. "You fight fair." The man's spit hit Jon in the eyes before his foot connected with his chest, sending Jon crashing back into the fire. The former bastard of Winterfell quickly rolled out of the flames and got to his feet, batting off the coals before wiping his eyes. The man with the knives readied himself for Jon when a white blur crashed through the door and launched itself at the man, ripping off one of his hands with one vicious bite. As always, Ghost had arrived right on time. The man looked down at his missing hand, bellowing in pain and spouting all sorts of curses. He was so lost in his pain that he failed to see Jon until the Valyrian steel slid into his stomach and out his back, lifting him off his feet. His blood poured down the handle, and Jon's hand pooling on the ground. Jon watched with gritted teeth as the light left the man's eyes before pulling the sword out and letting the body drop to the ground. Already Ghost had rushed off and tackled the man Ed was fighting. The mutineer's terrified cry cut short as the massive wolf tore out the man's throat. Jon looked around the hall as the fighting died down. The last man to die was beheaded by Grin and his double-bladed axe. Both Small Jon and Alicine looked fine, as did many of the others. Besides the bodies of the mutineers, there were 3 bodies belonging to the Watchmen, who had accompanied Jon, none of which he could identify by name. However, Jon still counted 4 less than the number he had started with. Where was the missing man? "Alicine, help her," Jon said, helping the woman up. The heiress to Bear Island quickly took over as Jon continued to search the hall. "Where is Slance?" The others looked around as well, some even rolling over the bodies of the dead, but all shook their heads. Jon scowled and gestured for Small Jon to follow him. The 2 northerners strode out of the hall and outside, where they found Jon asleep hidden behind the door. His sword was shaking in his grasp, and his eyes were wide and only showing one emotion, pure and utter fear. "Ah, Lord Jon, I was out here in case any of the mutineers tried to make a run for it," he babbled, the words falling from his mouth in a torrent of patheticness. Jon grabbed him by the front of his jerkin and slammed him up against the wall of the hall, their faces mere centimeters apart. "You abandoned your brothers, you craven." Slennet shook his head. "No, my lord, You fled," Jon roared. "The Lord Commander will hear about this, and I will see you punished." Jon shoved the man against the wall again before stepping back. He saw Slancel's sword hand squeeze the hilt tightly. The man looked ready to run Jon through with it. But the Northman wasn't about to let anything happen. He brought Frost up and leveled a bloody point at Slance's throat. "Try at your own peril," Jon growled. Slance's brief look of defiance quickly fell away as he looked down the blade at Jon's face. Whatever he saw there made him stop and drop his head, accepting his shame. Jon sneered and turned towards the other watchmen, all of whom were standing in the doorway and had watched the entire exchange. They showed no sign of sympathy for their disgraced brother. "Burn the bodies," Jon ordered. "All of them, Alicine. Bring her to the others, and tell them to pack up anything they need. We're leaving." "I'm brave." The bodies of the mutineers had been buried in a hastily dug pit before being doused in oil and set aflame. For the three rangers, actual pyres were erected with vials of oil placed among the branches. As much as Jon despised doing so, their bodies had been stripped of armor and weapons before being wrapped in their cloaks. Jon walked down the line with a burning brand, setting the funeral pyres on fire. The group of women watchmen and northerners watched in respectful silence as the three bodies burned. Behind them, sleds and carts were loaded with supplies, food and a few animals, those that were small enough to be placed in carts. The only animals that weren't small enough to ride were a pair of hairy cows. "What are we going to do now?" Peep asked quietly, breaking the silence. "Ed and you will lead the others and the women back to the wall," Jon answered, gazing at the pyres. "Ed, you're in charge." "What about you?" Ed asked. "Gren, Smalljon, Alysanne, and I will ride northwest and find the wildlings," Jon answered grimly. "It's time I met Mance Rayder." Eddard Stark. Ned resisted the urge to stare at his son. He knew that he had to keep his composure, especially since he was seated in the center of the main table at the front of the hall, the usual place for the Lord to sit during a feast. But he couldn't help but think about how much Bran had changed, a thought that overwhelmed his happiness to have his son back. The young man that Bran had turned into was serious, very soft-spoken, and extremely mysterious. Ned had met many men over his lifetime, with Howland Reed counting among some of the most mysterious, but none came close to the aura that his son now possessed. After Bran had reached Winterfell, escorted by men of Lestarth, and was met with a tearful Cat and Rickon, he, Ned, and Mira had a long conversation, where Howland's daughter had explained all that they had been through. Jaqen, Mira's brother, who had died beyond Wall, had dreams that involved Bran, and that's why the siblings had come to Winterfell years ago. It was Jaqen's duty to help Bran find who, and more importantly what, he was meant to be, and that meant going beyond the Wall and finding the three-eyed crow. Their story included Whites, children of the forest, a former brother of the Night's Watch turned half-white named Cold Hands, and Ned's brother Benjen. It was a tale that seemed impossible to believe. In the end, Ned had asked for some sort of evidence that Bran had truly become what he claimed to be. Flashback. "Mira, please leave," Bran said quietly. Howland's daughter glanced between the two Starks before bowing to Ned and leaving. When they were alone, Bran looked Ned right in the eye and began to speak. "I know Jon is the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark," he said simply, "and now it begins." Ned recoiled in his seat, unable to hide his shock. After a moment, he composed himself and leaned forward, clasping both hands in front of him. He did this not to look formal, but to keep them from shaking. "No," he murmured. "Now it ends." The Lord of Winterfell took a long moment, fighting back flashbacks before continuing the conversation. Those had been the exact dialogue that he had shared with Sir Arthur Dayne, before Ned and his companions had battled Sir Arthur and the other two Kingsguard in the shadow of the Tower of Joy. "How do you know this?" "I saw it," Bran said in an eerily calm tone. "I saw the fight. I smelled the roses and the blood. I saw the child and heard Lyanna's request. Give him an honorable name." "Jon," Ned whispered. "I named him after Jon Arryn." "Father, I am not the boy you left behind, nor am I the boy who ran from Osha," Bran said, changing the subject. "Bloodraven showed me who I am, who I was meant to be. I am the last Greenseer. I know more than any mortal has any right to, but that is my blessing and curse." Ned ran a hand through his hair, leaning back in his chair and staring at his son. "What does that even mean, Bran?" Ned's son thought for a moment before answering. "There's a war coming. The others are marching south. They did not want me to get south of the Wall because I hold the knowledge of their past war with mankind." "So it's true then, what Osha said. The others truly march south," Ned said. Bran nodded. "They do. We must prepare." "How?" Ned asked. "Because we have something that our ancestors didn't have when they fought the others during the First War," Bran said. "The Wall." Flashback. "Nedded?" Cat asked, shaking his hand a little. Ned shook himself from his thoughts, finding him staring at his son down at the table. He looked over at his wife, a confused look on his face. "Yes? Are you all right?" Cat asked. "You're pale, and you were shaking." Ned put his hand over Cat's. "I'm fine, Cat. Thank you." His wife didn't look convinced, but dropped the subject. Ned ate the rest of his food, spoke briefly with those who approached him before retiring early from the feast. Rickon was trying his best to pry anything out of Bran, while Mira and Osha were deep in conversation. Ned made eye contact with both women before walking out, hoping that they got the message. They met him on the battlements a few moments later, both wrapped in cloaks. Word had already been sent to Howland Reed that his daughter had returned to Winterfell safely. The letter did not, however, contain news of his son's death. Ned didn't think it was something the man should be told in a letter, but face to face, he owed his old friend that much at least. "What's the matter?" Osha asked. "You were right," Ned sighed. "The others do come." "You didn't think I was right before?" Osha asked, raising an eyebrow. "I had my reservations," Ned replied. "After speaking with Bran, I now know the truth." "So what do we do now?" Mira asked. "We have to prepare." Bran said the same, Ned said. "This is an enemy that we haven't fought or even thought existed in thousands of years. I will speak with Bran over the coming days to learn all I can." Asha grunted, crossing her arms. "So what's your plan, Lord Stark?" "Prepare as best we can," Ned said. "I'll have to send word to Robb, let him know that Bran has returned. But in the meantime, we'll have to prepare to fight an enemy that hasn't been seen, and many don't believe exists." "They've been seen," Osha chuckled darkly. "Just not by any southerner. Welcome to the nightmare that every man, woman, and child experienced north of the Wall, Lord Stark. Robb Stark." Robb and Robber sat close together at the back of the rowboat, while Brienne and Olin steadily rowed towards the island. Brienne, having grown up on Terith, had some experience with boats, and offered to help the old man row. The day was calm and clear, with the sun shining brightly overhead, and a pleasant breeze carrying over the lake. In the distance, the blackened ruins of Harrenhal rose above the treetops of the Isle of Faces. "Do many people visit the Isle?" Robber asked curiously. Alain shook his head. "Only those who are called to it. The last one that came through was almost 20 years ago. I'd wager," the old sailor shrugged, "but that one took a boat. I've heard stories of people swimming." "Swimming?" Robber asked, surprised. The old man cackled. "That's faith for you. The one that was rowed to the Isle, did they come back?" Robb asked. Olin nodded. "He did, though for good reason. He wasn't going to become a green man. The last one who did that came through 30 or 40 years ago. So he came to the Isle for advice." Robb guessed. "Do you remember the man's name?" Olin nodded. "I do, but if you want to talk to him, I'm afraid he's dead. Had his chest caved in on the Trident during the rebellion. They even renamed the ford because of his death." "Rhaegar?" Robb said. "Rhaegar Targaryen came to the Isle?" Olin nodded again. "Aye, that's the one. Looked like you did now, except he looked real shaky, had some real demons on his shoulders." "Not surprising," Robb muttered under his breath. After what the Bard Prince did to his aunt, he felt little sympathy for Rhaegar's soul. The boat ground against the firm sand of the Isle. Olin jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "Just follow the stone path. It should take you to the Green Man. It's a little mossy, but you can't miss it." "It should?" Brienne asked with a raised eyebrow. Olin smiled apologetically. "I dropped the food off at a stone bench just inside the tray line. That's what I was taught to do, and that's what my father before me was taught to do," he explained. "But if you're looking for the Green Man, that path is a good place to start." "How will we signal you to come back for us?" Robbar asked as he got off the boat. "There's a flint and steel on the bench and plenty of wood," Olin answered. "Not many come to the Isle, so there's not much of a reason to have a signal or nothing set up." "It's fine," Robb said. "Thank you, Olin." The old sailor nodded. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Your Grace." "So do I," Robb said, turning his gaze towards the forest as Robbor and Brienne helped push the boat back into the water. As Olin rowed away, Robb was rejoined by his guard. "Let's get to it then," Robb said quietly, pushing away whatever uncertainty he had about what he was about to do. The walk through the forest was gorgeous. Sun filtered through the trees, allowing natural shards of light to pierce the tree cover. The smell of nature, all the different species of trees, flowers, and earth, flooded Robb's senses and made everything feel peaceful and alive. The forest had a calming effect on Robb that the king could only relate to being with his wife and child. The weight of ruling, the burden that he had held for the past 2 years, became lighter. The further Robb walked, the trio came across a clearing with a cottage in the center of it. Heart trees formed a ring around the clearing, all with red faces drawn in terrified expressions facing towards the building. The moss-covered path stopped just as it reached the edge of the clearing. A wisp of smoke rose above the cottage, a sign of someone inside. "They're unsettling," Robb grunted, staring at the faces carved into the trees. "We're in the presence of the gods," Robb said quietly. "Whatever happens here, remember that." Robb didn't need to look over his shoulder to know that his words had confused the Velaman, but the Northern King had other things on his mind. There had been a strange feeling that had overtaken him when he had spoken to his dead relatives, both at High and again at Harrenhal. He felt that now, the old gods were here. He wasn't sure how he knew, but he did. "Stand guard out here," Robb ordered, pulling Claw from his side and handing it to Brienne. "Sire," Brienne went to say, but Robb held up a hand. "It's all right, Brienne," he said. "I doubt anyone here wishes us ill." "How do you know?" Brienne asked. "Call it faith," Robb replied, ignoring the irony in his words. Robb strode through the clearing, his steps measured and confident. He wasn't sure why he was saying what he was saying, but it was as if a small voice was in his mind, telling him what to say, giving him the confidence to walk freely into an unknown building and speak with a strange person without the protection of his Kingsguard or his sword. He wasn't even wearing his crown, the symbol of his power and authority. Robb paused at the door before pushing it open and walking in, closing it softly behind him. The inside of the cottage was small, square, and completely bare. The floor was made from hard-packed earth. In the center of the room, a warm, cheerful fire crackled and snapped, sending a steady stream of smoke up through the small hole in the roof. Shadows covered the rafters and the sides of the room, but Robb didn't care. A hooded figure sat hunched over, on a stool, on the other side of the fire. His cloak was forest green, and the hood was adorned with elk antlers. Robb couldn't make out his face, but there were dirt stains on his knees, and his hands, which warmed themselves by the fire, were dirty and calloused. "Robb Stark," the person said, his voice neutral and unmistakably masculine. "It has been a long time since I have been in the presence of a Stark." Robb frowned. The man's voice gave no indication of how old he was, but there were only a few Starks that Robb could think of that the man would have been old enough to meet, and Robb was almost sure that none of them had visited the Isle of Faces. "You're the Green Man?" Robb asked, although the question was unnecessary. Only green men lived on the Isle. "Am I supposed to be someone else?" the man asked, a note of challenge in his voice. Robb gave a small shrug. "I would hope not." The man nodded towards the seat opposite of him. "Sit, Wolf King, and say what you have come to say." Robb did as he was told. Any other king would have been annoyed or angered by the man's tone and lack of respect, but Robb wasn't like most kings. He tried not to stand on his titles, at least not unless he needed to, and he was also well aware that he had no power over the Isle. True, it was within his realm, but it was almost like the Green Men were a separate entity from his rule. "Does the long night come?" Robb asked, getting right to the point. The man lifted his head slightly, like Robb's question had caught him by surprise. "Do you think it does?" he responded.
Robb hesitated.
"I do," he admitted. "Wildings are coming south. I feel the chill in the northern wind as far south as King's Landing. Hells, I've fought dragons." "Then why did you come?" the man asked curiously. "You seem to have your mind made up." Robb shook his head. "I need definitive proof to convince the southern lords," he said. "I thought," he said, his voice trailing off and leaving the sentence unfinished. "You thought what?" the Green Man asked. "I thought that you could help me get that," Robb said. The Green Man seemed to study Robb from under his hood. Most of his face was still hidden, but Robb could at least see his eyes. They were dark brown almost to the point of being red, like burning coals. They gazed at the Northman with an intensity that made Robb shift in his seat. "The White Wolf prowls the wall," the Green Man finally said, "and the Black Wolf has gone back north to get you the proof that you need." Robb frowned, not understanding fully what was being said. "The White Wolf? You mean Jon?" The Green Man nodded. "Aye, the half-breed. He is your eyes and your ears in the north." Robb shook his head. "I know that. I sent him there for that reason." "What do you mean about the Black Wolf? Do you mean my Uncle Benjen?" "Do you know of any other Black Wolf?" the Green Man asks, still keeping his voice neutral. The Northern King sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a habit he was beginning to develop whenever he got annoyed or tired. "Am I just supposed to sit on my ass in King's Landing and do nothing?" The Green Man shook his head, standing up. "No, You will be busy as well, Robb Stark. Although the enemy in the north is great, you have one much closer to home. Come, he ordered, walking towards the door. Robb got to his feet and followed the man outside, where Robber and Brienne had been waiting, glaring at the forest. Their hands instantly dropped to their swords when they saw the Green Man emerge, but they relaxed when they saw Robb behind him. The Green Man nodded to the Kingsguard. Rune Carver. Giantess, he said mysteriously before walking towards the tray line. Come, all of you. Brienne gave Robb a questioning look. Robb simply shrugged, taking his sword back from his commander and sliding it back into his belt. We'll follow. As the trio followed the Green Man, there was a new noise in the forest that hadn't been there before. It was the creaking of branches and hushed, whispered voices that floated on the wind. Robb wasn't sure if he was actually hearing voices or if it was just a figment of his imagination, created by the stories of the Isle of Faces. Eventually they emerged into another clearing that was dominated by a massive heart tree. 100 other green-cloaked men strode around the area, and they were preparing for battle. They all wore mail and leather armor, wielding weirwood bows and spears and axes with weirwood shafts. On their shields, a heart tree on a field of green acted as their sigil. The strangest thing was that their weapons were not tipped with metal but black, glossy rock. The Green Man flipped back his hood and turned back towards Robb. He was in his mid-40s, with long brown hair and a stubble beard of the same color covering his lantern jaw. The Green Men go forth, once again to reclaim the lands of the old gods, he said. The deep forests once belonged to the old gods, and they will be so again, but before that can happen, there is one battle that we must fight first.
And what battle is that? Robb asked.
300 Faith militant march on the Isle, the Green Man said grimly. Led by the High Sparrow, the people of the village have long protected the Isle, and have helped those who seek to join our ranks, as well as those who seek our advice. We will protect them. We will join you, Robb said, immediately, not even thinking about the impossible odds they'd face. He had been unable to touch the High Sparrow, but now was his chance to put the old man in his place once and for all. The Green Man smiled slightly. Very well, Robb Stark. Come, you and your companions will need armor. If you are to fight alongside the Green Men, you might as well look the part.